Wait, I should wash my teeth.
Stream elements. Welcome to my channel. Nightbot. Welcome to my channel.
Okay, let's see. My girl, don't lie to me. No. Thanks. Streets of Rage. Streets of Rage. There you go. Take my mail.
Points, resistances, and strategy of attack. Our faithful hero begins their adventure fighting melee-owning monsters, feeble skeletons, slow zombies, and pathetic mini-demons. But it won't be long until you're running around dodging dozens of arrows and deadly magical abilities that can boil your blood. It's a fun time for all the family. With just one town and one dungeon den, Diablo is a deceptively simple game, a pure dungeon crawler, inspired by games that predated it by over 15 years. From a young age, David Brevik had always been a gamer, a big Dungeons & Dragons fan. His friends would enjoy many late nights playing Pac-Man and Asteroids on his Atari 2600 or sitting down to play D&D. At Brevik's school sat an Apple II Plus, a desktop computer at a time when computers small enough to fit atop a desk were still seen as a novelty. He used it to play games like The Wizard and the Princess, gazing in amazement at the fairy tale characters blinking on the monochrome screen. In the fall of 1979, Brevik's father brought home an Apple II Plus of his own. No longer did he have to wait to tinker with the computer, now he had full reign to play games and learn how to program his own. He would spend hours and hours typing code before he could even properly type. Utilizing the very early internet to call into BBSs and download illegal copies, Brevik would spend hours playing tons of different games. Where he could, he did buy a few games, but being a kid, money wasn't always easy to come by. There have been a variety of popular games over the past few decades that have fallen under the term roguelike. While the term has become so broad that it has lost close to all meaning past basic game design tropes such as random generation or permadeath, they all come from another game that birthed the genre, Rogue. Before the era of fancy PC graphics, Rogue's visuals were depicted via ASCII characters. Rather than a complex plot, there was a single dungeon rod. Go in, get the treasure, kill monsters, and if you want, kill the boss. The dungeon levels were randomly generated, never being exactly alike. While modern gamers who play RPGs for the story or graphics may scoff at this, frankly archaic title, these classic roguelikes were and still are incredibly addictive. The genesis of Diablo came from Brevik's hundreds of hours, arguably poorly spent, staring at the ASCII dungeons of Rogue and Moria. He was a fiend for these games during his time in college, obsessed by the strategizing, tension and gut-wrenching moments that came when things could and would go wrong. The turn-based combat gave the player enough time to consider every move and every possibility, but also painfully drawing out the fateful demise of a character you have come to love after many hours spent with them. You had ample time to try and save yourself, or watch on in horror as your hero was condemned to their fate. This tension was only raised further by the brutal choice to use permadeath. At its core, Diablo was to be the updated, modern version of those games Brevik had loved. The odd thing was that it had taken so long for these old monoliths of the fantasy adventure genre to be given a modern makeover. Dungeon Hack had tried in 1993, but it lacked the depth of gameplay that its visually primitive forerunners provided. That and it being a first-person game built upon the Eye of the Beholder engine kept it too visually dissimilar from its original inspirations to effectively respawn the oft-forgotten titles. Brevik already knew they had a winner on their hands based on the love that Rogue and its derivatives had once had. Diablo isn't an RPG as the genre had grown to know. It's an isometric action game like its influences, with strength not in its plot or storyline, nor in depth or detailed character development. Diablo puts its full emphasis on gameplay, exploring the darkened labyrinth, and it isn't long until we find ourselves approached on all sides by the undead. Something has awoken these empty vessels, and it's only through the smash of a club, the piercing of an arrow, or the cleansing of magic that they may be vanquished. The controls in Diablo are some of the most simple you can possibly have in gaming. There are means of making them slightly more complicated for streamlining gameplay with the use of hotkeys, but peeled back to its bare essentials, all you need is your mouse and the ability to left and right click. This can be a one-hand game. If this is your kind of thing, programmer Rick states from the remembered one of the things he'd do is play the game one-handed. Future changes to the control scheme were based off of that. How straightforward could they make them? As Dr. Matt Barton said in his History of Computer Role-Playing Games, the outcome is a game that fits the old adage, easy to learn but hard
my
to master.
pick is sharp, my
If you can
beard
click a
is
mouse button, you
groomed,
can play
here
Diablo.
I come.
Okay, I guess I'll just do this.
As a result, gamers who had never played a CRPG before still found it intuitive and addictive, removed from the confusion associated with the game's contemporaries. Eric Schaefer explained how it was their goal to make a role-playing game that didn't require a whole lot of thought, that was just entertaining and fun to play. Most other RPGs were pretty in-depth and geeky, a lot of decision trees and dialogue that they wanted to skip. So well thought out all
Mission locked in. Powering up the drop pod.
That may require the memorization of 20 plus keys to progress. Diablo's controls help enhance the experience, not detract from it. They're almost innate. Left clicking anywhere on the floor means a character there. Left clicking right click skill icon. Beyond the mouse, assignable hotkeys along the function bar allow us to switch to our favorite spells in a pinch, and the number keys align with our 8 belt slots, quickly consuming any potions or scrolls positioned there. And similar to Ultima Underworld, drag and drop works directly from the inventory window into the playable area. Holding down the left mouse button to move an attack provides a slightly more relaxing experience, but even if it is pure placebo, frantically clicking around on the wisdom almost feels more effective than watching. It's immediately apparent when we start clearing the first level of the cathedral that the team spent a lot of time considering the controls, and it only highlights how good of a job they did when Diablo is one of the few 90s RPGs that doesn't actually require its manual or any sort of hero to teach us the ropes. I hate from this channel how older titles were often designed with the manual in mind, more time to look back at any form of in-game guidance. Diablo may not have any either, but that's only because it doesn't need them. The manual, like many forms, is home to a variety of methods that will improve our understanding of the game, but its role as a necessity does not bring forward this game from that perspective. It did adequately explain the left. They've even got a handy diagram for those who have used it before. That alone goes to show just how important it was to build a course that everyone could play, their long test being the key behind all of this. The controls are rarely problematic, barring one instance. Generally speaking, the fastest way to move around is to hold the mouse button down in the direction you want to go, but when walls get in the way, your character will try to pathfind their way around it, usually taking a wrong turn right after your attacker is chasing you. It's a problem that can be easily avoided by being a little more careful, but it's still highly annoying when it does happen. Simplicity carries over into new UI elements may not be in favor today, but it's a necessity if the game can be played with a mouse. Despite its size, it's no larger than any other strategy game or CRPG at the time, smaller than quite a few actually. Gamers will feel right at home, and newbies can easily distinguish what everything is at a glance. Intuition top priority, and it's a key reason why this game has aged so well. The lower vision only tells you what you need to know with a quick glimpse, but the ingenuity only pop-ups. For lack of real estate, much of the private information, inventory, spellbook, and character attributes cannot be stored in the standard game screen. RPGs usually take you out of the action completely to enter a separate zone, do your business, and then return to the game. Diablo ingeniously used pop-up screens that cover only half of the action window at a time. This is all commonplace now, but stick with me here. In most other CRPGs, if we're stuck in a fight and you see that the weapons are about to break, hit an I to take us to the inventory, we're pulled out of the gameplay. Have all the time in the world to make a decision, and all the time needed to calm down and prepare. That's fine in a turn-based game, but in real time with a focus on keeping the action fast-paced, such pauses give too much respite. Players earn a sense of accomplishment when they overcome odds, when they succeed despite their racing heart. This is an action RPG. Action comes first. In Diablo, if you're fighting a gang of goatmen and you realize that you forgot to wear that new armor you just bought, you just click the Inv button to open the inventory on the right half of the screen, grab the armor and drop it over the chest icon. Bam! Now you're protected. And the whole while, you've been able to keep fighting on the other half of the screen. It's similar to Ultima Underworld, which also allowed inventory management during live gameplay. Diablo's isometric click-focused style of combat makes its implementation less of a struggle though. The non-stop gameplay unlocks a whole other level of high high-tier play, where we can flip in and out of various gear, switching out between whichever magical items and weapons may be best for the next fight on the fly, with no lull in the gameplay, and it can all be done without ever having to touch a keyboard. Can you imagine playing the Diablo clone without this expected functionality? We can only be thankful that this grandfather of the genre set the precedent. Using hotkeys may be smart, but they aren't required, and that helped Diablo's mainstream appeal immensely. The same goes for leveling up your attributes, picking up loot from the floor, choosing your next spell, or customizing your belt loadout. It can all be done with one hand. It wasn't the first to do this. Other RPGs such as Ultima 7 had similar mechanics, but its use was still rare. The inventory pop-up itself is a square grid of 10 by 4 empty spaces. The different objects you can acquire take up the grids from a single space for a win potion up to 3 by 2 spaces for a large or a small wizard alone. The only limit on what you can carry is the space, not the weight of the items. A really made can carry just as much as a warrior, which may not make sense at first until one remembers that this is space-based, not weight-based. The backpack can only handle so much, regardless of its carrier's ability. Inspired by XCOM, the inventory management is akin to Tetris, moving around the objects to best maximize the amount of valuable loot one can hold back.
Rock and stone.
You find yourself stacking in gold, scrolls, and potions along the bottom in a single double row, so you can fill the top with various weaponry and armor. It works well enough, but without the player's intervention, the inventory system's default are problem. They won't store the items you pick up in a sensitive order, so they're the dealer informing us that they can't carry anymore when they definitely can. We fixed this with the aforementioned inventory Tetris, but I can't help but wonder whether a management in-game fits the design philosophy. With every other system streamlined to focus accessibility and action, this feature grinds gameplay to a halt if, like any good loot goblin, you wish to fill your pockets with as much as you physically can. There's an argument that the inventory space is too small. An RPGFan.com review from 1997 complains about each item taking up too much space, drastically limiting how much you can carry, slowing down your loot and sell process. While true, it's clear to me that this works for balancing purposes, why else would it be a staple of RPGs going forward? With no limit, players could enter the dungeon with a backup set of equipment they could switch to for any given scenario, like switching to fire-resistant armor when facing a specific type of monster, and then changing to another enchanted set afterwards. This is still entirely possible, but it has been balanced as such that it's an important decision to make. If you choose to do this, you are sacrificing how much you can carry, picking safety and dungeon progression over grabbing new items. The reviewer is right in saying, however, that no matter what, you'll have to make a lot of trips back to town just to clean your inventory, which I must agree does get annoying. Only more so when we'll find ourselves running the same loop around town to visit the estate vendors. True too is the complaint that gold in particular is a pain to carry. By the end game we'll be flushed with stuff and have little room in our bag for anything else. Gold takes up one inventory square per 5,000 doubloons, which sounds like a lot at first, but we'll be rich with over 100,000 of the stuff by the end of the game. It is the only item that can stack, but 5,000 just isn't enough. You can drop the gold in town and it should be fine, but that just adds even more inventory management when it comes to making the rounds to the shops. With Devolution X, and any other modded versions for that matter, this is no longer as inconvenient as it used to be, as gold can be stored away in a stash that won't disappear, a la Diablo 2. The character and inventory windows are smaller in the modded versions too, so you won't need to compromise your field of view, as expected with greatly improved resolution. Another minor issue corrected by the new engine is the shop inventory space. In vanilla, it's missing vital information, namely whether a weapon is one or two-handed, leading to the inevitable heartbreak for a warrior specialized in sword and board. The last thing you want after saving up and spending over 20k on a weapon is to find that it's two-handed. A simple toggle in the modded version adds weapon graphics to the UI, so you can now see what the weapon is before handing over your hard-earned dough. For the on-screen map, the team took direct inspiration from Star Wars Dark Forces, where the automap sits atop of the gameplay so we can explore and fight and simultaneously analyze where we need to go. Since map movement and character movements are independent, you can even get an overview of the whole level while moving in a different direction too. This being distracted at times, and around the smaller corner-based alternative is sorely missed, but you won't find yourself requiring the map to be permanently open for casual play anyway. I only bring it up to find any doors or areas I may have missed in my endless goal of 100% in every automap I find in a game like this. It may not be the most time-efficient way to play, but there's something so satisfying about filling in the entire map and knowing that you've done everything you possibly can on this level before moving onwards. The belt is the vital component that ties the UI together. With it, we are able to heal and replenish our mana without compromising our play space. Or place magical spells there, or we cast a spell without using the spellbook interfaces. This is a huge savior in tough battles, allowing the player to face tank any enemy as long as they remain well stocked with the appropriate potions. However, an odd interface quirk leaves a key flaw in how the belt reacts to the use of the shift key. By default, shift left click will automatically consume a scroll or potion from either the belt or inventory window, acting the same as using right click. Yet pressing shift number to interact with the numbered belt hotkeys won't work. This is especially irritating when holding shift so you can attack without moving during combat. If you forget to let go of shift as you hit the hotkey, you won't consume the item as intended. The difference between life and death when needing to use a health potion to save you from an otherwise certain demise. Combat then, in its most basic form, isn't very impressive. Diablo is extremely streamlined for the genre at the time, removing complexities of attack directions or speed multipliers. Simply click, let the hidden dice roll, and watch your either hit or miss. Despite this purity, as action is the key feature, it's also the most varied. One cannot use the same strategies for all situations. Combat becomes a surprisingly dynamic, fluid process, fluctuating greatly depending on the character class played, the equipment available, and the monsters involved. Speaking of, there is a commendable degree of differentiation between the monsters, and for their time, they are gorgeously designed and animated. The distinct art style shines through, ensuring each enemy type is easily distinguishable based only on its darkened shadow at the edge of the screen. They act differently too, determining which strategy you wish to use when encountering them. For example, the various kinds of goat men will run when attacked. However, if one counts on the Lake King Hellmine behaving the same way, they'll meet an untimely death. Zombies slowly shamble around you, skeletons rattle towards you with deadly intent, acid beats spit closer puddles at your feet, and fallen ones retreat if you attack their friends. The combat AI is an Alleluia in that when other members are easy. The fear that your opponents are fighting the easiest path to a quick soul ball on attack. They have the little nuance against the set gap, taking their range advantage. Wounded or isolated monsters will often flee, and groups try to attack together, relying on numbers to overwhelm. They work their way around obstacles, and ranged attackers will keep their distance, usually retreating if you chase them down. Frustratingly well too if you're a warrior with no ranged abilities of your own. Some even have extra abilities like temporary invisibility and teleportation, but you always need to feel your toes. You don't learn from others' mistakes though, and can be easily persuaded to make dumb decisions like drifting into a flaming hot wall of fire. The first few Labyrinth levels are, of course, relatively easy. Most foes here are only strong enough to survive 1 or 2 hits, and they don't deal a whole lot of damage either, unless we get swamped. It's through flinching that they can easily cut us down. You see, every time we're hit, we have a chance to flinch. This immediately ends our current animation, forcing us to start another. For the warrior, this means that with enough bad guys around us all swinging at once, we will be incapable of dealing any damage in retaliation. Even the most pathetic of demons can cut us down if we find ourselves in this position. The basic strategy then is to fight them on our own terms, ideally in a one-on-one situation where we know we can beat them in a fair fight. To do this, we must take advantage of their zone. Basically, we drift into the zone of awareness that surrounds each foe, we'll notice the hero and begin to move closer. We can instead advance ahead if we are confident in our abilities. not attract too many of them at once. A fan-favourite trick that later becomes a survival skill is to force a group of enemies into a bottleneck. In the earlier levels, the easiest way is to stand inside a doorway, which keeps them coming in one at a time. Later in dungeons, once doors are phased out, you'll have to use other obstacles like panels or corners to achieve a similar result. Rogues and sorcerers in particular should pot as many obstacles in their target's path as possible. While these classes inflict great damage from a distance, they're next to useless in hand-to-hand combat unless specifically built with melee in mind, in which case you're straying away from their most powerful abilities. The advantages of a ranged form of attack of our own becomes clear when the enemy roster begins being heavily weighted in favour of archers and later on mages. The warrior class will find themselves holding these foes by the feet, gathering them in the corners to prevent them from skirmishing. Having to do this one by one grows dull in time, particularly because it feels like the AI reacts based on your click rather than the hero's actual movements. By which I mean an enemy archer will move in the opposite direction of our click as soon as we send the command, not when our character visually performs the movement. Leaning into the style of slower, calculated combat was intentional. Eric Schaefer said that the game had more tactical gameplay because many of the monsters would move at pretty much the same speed as your player. You could work with monsters, and that's as much as you wanted to do. It may slow things down, certainly compared to the fast-paced sequels, but that's part of the original game's appeal. It's more of a thoughtful style of play. We can't just rely on stacking powerful items, skill tree abilities, and spamming a single form of attack until everything on screen is dead. Instead, the moment-to-moment gameplay requires more precise consideration, especially when it comes to moving the enemy AI to our advantage. Coming from Diablo 2, where movement speed is the be-all and end-all, Diablo's walking can feel like an eternity, but it's how you approach the game that matters. Diablo 2 is about speed, Diablo 1 is about approach, and actually helps with the game's atmosphere. Diablo is meant to be a scary game, and while I'll admit it doesn't offer the same level of immersive horror as, say, Dead Space, it's methodical walking, strict darkness, and unforgiving difficulty is what a people major seek. It's fear through failure. Tension is at an all-time high when you're surrounded by enemies, hoping to run to a more advantageous position. Spamming potions and what spells will can a close and out of life. Fully aware that you've forgotten to save in the last 30 minutes, and everything is on the line. One mistake and all you can do is stare at the main menu, deciding whether to hit load or wallow in defeat. That is what makes Diablo so exhilarating in a way that its sequels aren't, unless you use permadeath. There isn't any dynamic respawning or waypoints to get you back into the fray. Every action matters more. For the stat nerds, there are only 3 key statistics which dictate the outcome of a combat encounter. They are primarily affected by our equipment or abilities, but attributes also play a role. AC or armor class determines how easy it is to get hit. With a high AC, attacks against us are less likely to succeed, acting more like a chance to dodge than actually absorbing any amount of damage like a damage reduction or damage threshold stat in other RPGs. And to exemplify its role as a dodge stat, adding points into dexterity will also raise our armor class. Arrows will pass us by, swings of an axe will bounce off of our armor, and claws fail to find their mark. Shields further assist our defensive efforts, and certain magical items can also add points to AC. The hit chance represents our accuracy with weapons. The base to hit value is calculated via our dexterity before it is augmented by various enchanted items. Note that some items can even make the to hit chance worse. Finally, the damage rating reflects the amount of destruction we can inflict. Given as a range of values depending on RNG, we'll strike an enemy for any amount within the range indicated. This is determined by our weapons, strength attributes, magical modifiers, as well as dexterity, although to a small extent. Between strength and dexterity, dexterity has the overall higher benefit, affecting each key as a 100% to hit chance. Dexterity becomes less important, as well as there, in my experience, being far more magical items that modify armor class and hit chance. than there are ones that increase strength or damage. Due to this item balancing, strength is still of high importance for warriors and rogues. An interesting idea in Diablo is that as you kill more creatures of a given type, you will be given more information about them. As the kill count increases, so does the knowledge of the creature in question, eventually learning their exact hit points and resistances. While much of this is intuitive, i.e. members of the Fire Clan are immune to fire, it's still a useful additional extra. Like the player, monsters can belong to one of three classes: undead, animal, and demons. Each class comes with its own strengths and weaknesses on top of individual feats. Undead creatures often finally pose a disadvantage to resistant attacks like 50% less damage from them, while being weak against blunt weapons, which deal an additional 50% damage. The Holy Bolt spell is only capable of harming the undead too. Well, and Diablo himself, but we won't get into him for animals, also known as beast creatures, will enter the enemy pool around level 3 of the dungeon, with bats and minotaur-like goatmen known as the Khazra. Animals are direct opposites of the undead, weak to sharp melee weapons and resistant to blunt ones like clubs and maces. You'll notice that from level 1 you'll be facing these little demon fellas known as fallen ones. Just like the grunts in Halo, their presence isn't much of a concern to the player, except for their confusing denomination as an animal class, despite the manual categorizing them as soldiers of Baal, described as heroes. Demons are entirely bold, no weaker nor stronger against any particular form of weaponry, with their only stipulation being that they are immune to holy bolt. But so are animals, so that isn't really unique. My theory then is that fallen ones and their variations are placed under the animal class so that they are extra weak in the early game, with most warriors likely using swords because they chose, and fallen ones will easily be vanquished, helping new players gain confidence. Even that, there was a disconnect between the programmers and the lore writers. The lore that calls them devils is relegated to the manual and a side quest for Ogden concerning his insight. It's possible that the programmers hadn't seen this and placed it as an animal incorrectly, or calling them an animal was a means of separating them from the higher class of demons. In the story, it was seen as a hindrance of the devil, a lesser real than the Fun fact, the Diablo fandom Winston states that when the Diablo game window is open, it plays a deep plan, assuming that of Diablo himself. When this life is sped up several times, it becomes the sound that the fallen ones emit upon death. However, this isn't actually their death sound. It's a little bit closer to the sound of a scavenger, but still not identical. Just another reason to not take wikis at face value, especially not when there is no given source. Outside of the creature classes, those individual resistances are an important consideration. The magical forces in the world of Diablo are unpredictable. All characters and most creatures are able to resist the effects of various spells. The hero has 3 resistant values: resist general magic, resist fire, and resist lightning. Normally these are all at 0, meaning that you're at the mercy of these hazards. Certain magical items grant resistances to some or all of the aforementioned values, like your ring of resist fire, for example. Assuming your resistance level of 75% makes you virtually immune to whatever the resistance is against. Still though, 25% of that can be a hefty amount, considering most resistance immunities will determine how you must face them in combat. For the warrior and rogue, it won't be too much of a consideration, as you will be focusing primarily on physical attacks with melee weapons and bows. For the mage who relies on spells, it can make or break their effectiveness. As it takes 15 kills of a specific mob for the interface to highlight these resistances, you'll find yourself testing various magics trying to find which one works. Most resistances can be overcome with sheer firepower. What's 50% reduction going to do against a barrage of spell spam? But it's those pesky immunities you want to look out for, as they block 100% of that form of attack. Weapon choice also has an effect. Each type of melee weapon varies in speed, following standard RPG rules of daggers being fast and big two-handed axes being slow. You may preference raw damage, but the damage per second benefits of a faster swing cannot be overlooked, particularly when the swing animation can be so easily cancelled by an enemy attack. The more swings, the higher the chance of landing a hit and avoiding that deadly stun lock. Spells too feel different from each other. For example, the Chain Lightning spell is designed to be used on a swarm of enemies, firing extremely fast bolts of lightning in an outwards direction. The Fireball, on the other hand, takes a second to cast, and is best used from a distance with well-placed aim. It is true that many of the spells are simply variations of this Fireball, with alterations in damage output and magic type, but that's to be expected with a D&D inspired spellbook. Even so, the diversity is commendable. Lightning sends jagged bolts running for enemies, damaging many at a time. The Golem spell creates an intimidating stone ally. It takes some aggro. Telekinesis allows you to open or close doors at a distance to hurt the hordes. Healing restores your lost health points at the cost of mana, and it replaces your health point with your mana. It gives you double the amount of hit points, and so on. With Resistance's system too, a Fireball spell may be lethal in one situation, yet useless in another. To best survive the dungeons of Diablo, a magical based character will need to spec into an assortment of spells, not just overlevel a single one. By finding or buying bucks to learn and increase a spell's power, there are even visible differences as they level up, providing an aesthetic as well as a gameplay incentive to make your spells more powerful. The key reason, of course, being that the stronger a spell, the less mana it costs and the more damage it does. But a few extra sparks and whistles doesn't hurt either. The highest level of spell proficiency is 15. Temporary magic increases through enchanted stats can raise the spell level to 17, yet the advantage is removed as soon as you stop wielding said stat, and the difference in power isn't great enough to be worth the effort of finding that item in my experience. All classes can cast spells, but the proficient sorcerer class benefits from being able to cast them more rapidly than the others. It isn't unusual to find yourself unleashing several spells a second as your mastery improves. While being able to control the game entirely by mouse is appreciated, it is with Magic where hotkeys come into their own. There are two spellbook interfaces, the large one existing for the information it provides, the damage a spell does, and more eminently, the number of mana required to cast it. The window, however, takes up half of your game. This isn't too bad if all you're doing is grabbing a few potions for your belt, but switching spells on the fly like this is cumbersome, which is why the quick spellbook is a masterful stroke from Blue, condensing the spellbook into a in seconds. It does require some memorization on the player's part, but believe me, compared to some of the intense runes other RPGs require, this is easy scoop. From the quick spellbook, you can assign custom hotkeys to the spell, limited to the function keys in the original game, but with Devolution X, we're free to pick whatever we want. I went for purity myself, utilizing ancient muscle memory from years past of games like Dota 2 and League of Legends. With said hotkeys, a skilled wizard can switch between traversal spells like Teleport to damaging spells like Firewall in no time at all, even flipping between various types of offensive magic on the fly. Not many monsters in the game, barring their immunities, will be able to survive an onslaught of fire and lightning flying at them from all angles as the ghostly figure in the distance phases across the room in the blink of an eye. If you want to feel powerful, this is how you do it. It's not like this is even an exploit. Late game mages down in the hell levels will use this very tactic themselves, and it is through those bastards that I learnt the technique. Fight fire with fire, if you will. Before one can learn a spell, the player's character must have the necessary intelligence. Displayed as your magic attribute in-game, it can be raised as you level up, and again the sorcerer class will be stronger here, starting the game with a higher base magic level and able to upgrade the stat far beyond that of the warrior, hitting a cap of 250 versus the warrior's pitiful 60. Interestingly, the rogue is also able to hit the stat cap of 250, but does not benefit from the increased mana of the sorcerer. She's smart, but not as innately talented. Scrolls with their one-shot affairs are ideal for builds with a limited mana pool size. As long as you have the required magical ability, they can be cast for free. Well, not free, they do cost gold, quite a lot of it too for the more powerful ones. A scroll spell is cast at the level known to the caster, unless said caster does not know it, in which case it is cast at level 1. Unlike health, which can be restored through scrolls, a spell, or from potions, mana points can only be replenished by that sweet blue liquid nectar. Keeping well stocked in these is vital, which means many a trip to and from
Wait up.
Luckily,
Hold on, wait a minute.
Portal spell allows any character to travel up and back down the dungeon as quickly as possible. No matter your build, it's this portal that will be your best friend, both as a means of convenience, but also as a last resort escape when your health is woefully low and you're stuck in a losing fight. You may not realize it looking at this footage, but magic was even more powerful than it is in the retail version of the game, and is already arguably the most overpowered form of play in that. The game's funniest development story was only possible due to how unbalanced sorcery was. A $100 bounty was offered to the first Blizzard staffer to kill Diablo.
And so we had this skill in the game called Blood Exchange. What this skill did is it swapped your hit points with a monster.
In seconds, the strongest foe in the game could be vanquished by stealing his health points, replacing them with comparatively none, and then casting a basic fireball.
Well, we didn't think that through, did we? And we probably yanked the skill out of the game.
The original spellbook was set to have 5 pages. Blood Exchange, actually named Blood Ritual, was one of them. Left on the CD, we can find that the cut spells were Invisibility, whose icon graphic was reused for the teleport spell in Blood Boil, Doom Serpent, Etherealize, and Sentinel. Some of these spells were actually implemented in the official Hellfire expansion that we'll look at much later. Page 5 spells were going to be the most powerful, and if you're curious, you can still access this page in-game. There's a tiny area of about 2 pixels in between the 4 button and the border of the spellbook interface. If you click on this, the spell page appears with no corresponding button. A key factor behind why I believe Diablo became as big of a hit as it was is down to something that's a bit harder to put into clear terms. Fighting just feels good. It's enjoyable at an elementary level. Picking an enemy, walking over, smashing it with a stick, and watching it crumble as their death whimper plays is satisfying in an almost carnal nature. And it has to be too, because it's the same action you will be performing ad nauseum. Had they got this wrong, the game would have been a chore to play, and when described as I just did, it sounds like it would be. And yet, progressing through the dungeon, performing click smash or click twang or click zap is enough of a thrill to hold up the entire experience. It's hard to explain without actually playing the game yourself, but even for myself who had played far more aesthetically impressive games before Diablo, I still see the appeal. The developers were more than aware of this. Artist Michio Okamura acknowledges that if they couldn't have gotten the mechanic to feel fun and satisfying, they would not have been able to get the casual players to play long enough to get them hooked. It's what made Diablo so accessible to a larger audience, including people who normally didn't play RPGs or PC games in general. Eric Schaefer explained how the combat was of ardent importance during development. It was the fast reaction of the mouse click. There was no pause before your guy started the shamble over there. We reiterated on that over and over, and really just nailed a feeling that wasn't in most games at the time. We aimed to feel crisp, and your character would do exactly what you wanted when you clicked. We were always going for a tactile feel, a crunchy feel we called it.
Clunk, clunk, clunky down.
It's these sound effects tied together with pristine pixel art and daunting dungeon music that sets the atmosphere for Diablo's dungeon. There's a hopeless tone, impaled corpses, slain adventurers, and burning crosses are common sights. Environments have a suitably gloomy and evil theme, with each tier of the dungeon ramping up the wickedness. Tristram looks like it's barely surviving, on the verge of collapse. The church has an air of unholiness, not often associated with such divine architecture. architecture. As the design of each floor changes, you encounter more horrific monsters, and even the music itself morphs darker and darker. It's surprisingly scary, even though the gameplay itself is simple. You're basically clicking a mouse and not much else, yet through its masterful tone, it works. The labyrinth is unkempt and haunted. The catacombs are dark, and gloomy. The caves mix wide-open caverns with flowing rivers of lava and mountain walls. And hell? Well, it's what you might expect. The lie of skeletal balustrades, obsidian walls filled with magma, and helpless, tortured humans
Put up
galore.
a few
For its time,
pipes, they
Diablo's
said.
visual fidelity
It'll be
is
easy,
fantastic.
they
Its
said.
40x80p spine-chilling SVGA graphics technology with 256 colors and taking full advantage of DirectX 3. The game rendered graphics at a level of quality with consistent frame rate that wasn't common. It's hard to imagine looking at it today in its vanilla state, but Diablo was known as a looker, with reviews across the board praising how gorgeous it was, despite its simplicity in the face of the steadily
think we
growing
actually have a
market.
chance to make it out
Importantly,
alive.
unlike those 3D games, Diablo could be easily run on a variety of machines, ensuring that their mass appeal strategy spread beyond the gameplay and into the hardware specifications. What use is it guaranteeing that a tech-illiterate parent could play Diablo if they wouldn't be able to run it? Discussing this strong atmosphere, Revit claims that the reason that it feels like a real place is that the game is small. By keeping the amount of locations to a minimum, they were really able to make those flourish. A quality over quantity approach. It's one element where he believes Diablo 1 beats its younger brother too.
I think I largely prefer the dark, gritty atmosphere of Diablo 1 to Diablo 2, even though a lot of people consider Diablo 2 dark and gritty. But I think Diablo 1 is even darker, and so I prefer that the most.
Blizzard North's commitment to guaranteeing timeless pixel art graphics was laid out in 2003's post-mortems from game developers. Schafer explained how the team developed Diablo with almost no proprietary tools at all. They cut out all the background tiles by half and used commercial software to process
Pump sequence at 25%.
Similar to the techniques employed by a smorgasbord of Nintendo games or Bethesda Softworks with Battlespire and some of the valuable spots. What was proprietary is the lighting and fire systems. The team were unable to find any plugins that could do what they wanted, so they wrote them themselves. It was worth the extra effort too. The spells are made phenomenal awesome spread across the screen. This was a huge deal in the 90s. After reading about CRPG reviews, you'll notice that advanced lighting and fancy spells were among gamers. For decades, players have wanted video games to envisage magic the same way their imagination had when playing tabletop games. So any game that got close was commended. Diablo found coming from the impressive firewalls that immediately lit the surrounding room as they melded all those trapped within. Blizzard North wanted to make a fantasy game that felt unique from the others on the market. Maintaining their theme of gothic-inspired horror, the artists dubbed their art direction Gothic Fantasy, a combination of trying not to look like everything else, and directly influenced by Schafer's love for the dark and grimy Italian zombie movies. They wanted it to be gritty and gory. This carried over to all aspects of Diablo's design. Artist Kelly Johnson articulated how whatever we make, from the smallest potion to the monsters and environments, we wanted to achieve Gothic horror. We didn't see a lot of that in the gaming world at the time. We didn't want to do anything that was known. Diablo was the dark and bloody
Ward is down! Come to the rest of them!
Standards, the horde of enemies veiled in darkness and still made your heart racing, especially when they're woefully under-equipped for the test ahead. While that may not sound pleasant, it is. Conclusions may not think possible from an isometric game how heavily their visual styling and the pounding drums are on the soundtrack. A lot of it has to do with the audio and visual feedback. Using a health potion produces a satisfying bubbling noise. All pieces link together upon the drum. Skeletons crackle in the pieces as they open heavy armor on a
Fight for rocket
weapon sounds are necessarily
Pipeline functional
punchy,
again.
the twang of a
However,
bow
we
and a
still
swing
have
of a staff or
malfunctions
the
in the
clash of
system.
a sword. Granted, you'll be hearing them often as there is a distinct lack of variation, but they manage to not get on your nerves as they're interspersed with other effects. Usually the ever so satisfying monster deaths. They perish resoundingly, whether with a grunt,
All
moan, or
pipelines
squish.
fixed and
The
operational
ridiculous
again.
and sometimes humorous death animations combined with these sounds add a lot to Diablo's appeal. They explode, tumble, melt, crumble, collapse, fling their disembodied
Swarm!
parts
We got
about,
another
squirt
swarm!
bodily fluids, or disintegrate. The sound of liquefied grey matter sloshing on the dungeon floor. When you get right down to it, killing monsters is what this game is all about, so it was necessary to reward for combat as satisfying as it is. Fallen ones drop to the ground with their organs splayed out on the floor. Hulking steel lords burst into white
Ready to
flames,
kill
and the
some
sacrifice
more
continues her
crates.
seductress ways even in death. That last one is a little infamous, but given those experiences and the kingdom of hell itself, it fits both the 90s Marvel TV series and the Diablo's world design. Kelly Johnson remembers designing them fondly. I was inspired because Mikio made great models. The succubus is sexy, you know, so I wanted to make her walk very confidently, not like a typical demon. When a creature died, it had to fit in a certain space. That's why a lot of the death animations in Diablo involve sequential. One just disappears because after a while we couldn't come up with different ways to do the death animations in one spot. The succubus death was done so that her body would fit in the tile. The animation
Well
was
done.
very
Cargo rocket
suggestive.
is
It
returning
fit
to
her
orbit.
character.
We're
And the
sending in
guys
the
in the
drop pod
office
to get
liked
you
it,
out.
so it
Hang
stayed.
tight.
What is rare for the time is that not all of those sound effects are stop either. Revit remembers how Bowman made the sound effects for skeletons breaking apart on some pencils and dice shaking and in a cup. What sound effects are used have been used to alter to a degree where even the discerning listener won't be hard-pressed to recognize the origin. Unlike, say, Morrowind and its swinging door noise being shared with a myriad of others, and even in television productions. There's nothing wrong with using sound effects as is, but the efforts taken to morph them to suit Diablo is more a degree of care and creativity that was rare for video game series at the time. It wasn't until later that focus on touch the compound Tristram theme, but Ullman's expertise carries down into the dungeon. Themes filled with low pounding drums and distant screams that grind away at your confidence, with a layer of doom re-amplifying a degree of badassery. In the background, electric guitar riffs help to sell Diablo both as a horror and action game. It's a fantastic ambient soundtrack. A brilliant review of Diablo's official soundtrack put into words why these musical themes are so great, far better than I ever could. So I won't even try. All credit goes to greatestgamemusic.com for these beautiful excerpts. The key to the soundtrack's success is Ullman's astonishing creativity in manipulating his guitar material. With constant virtuosity, he tweaks his guitar lines into surprising dissonances and off-kilter fade-outs that catch listeners by surprise, combined with a tasteful orchestral background that add feelings of both foreboding and sorrow. Drone and cello and double basses, unsettling whining violin, wordless vocals that range from disembodied choirs to eerie moans, pounding percussion ringing out from the depths of the dungeons. Despite their quite minimalist nature, Diablo's tracks all develop well during their running time. They patiently roll out their slow-burning, tense ambience until the listener has been truly sucked in. The ingredients may be familiar, but Ullman manages to deploy them effectively on compositions that border on twisted sound collages. Other reviewers too rightfully gushed over the work. Adrenaline Vault's Brian Clare even gave it 5 stars, the first time he ever did so, noting how for years he had waited for a game to come out with a perfect musical score. The music is just as perfect as the sound effects in both quality of the sound and the score itself. Everything about it is perfect for the fantasy genre. Ullman achieved this exquisite result by a process of elimination, throwing everything at the wall until the final result was good enough. In his interview with Craddock, he recalls how composing Diablo's soundtrack was a process of grinding until things stuck. The first couple of months of attempts were bad. The composition process wasn't linked to each particular background during their inception. What became the opening cathedral theme was actually intended to be something like a final boss theme. Allman's stylistic approach was to make the music more primitive, with more basic structures, generally consisting of 70 to 110 second chunks that fade into each other, with more metered and focused material, like a strong beat or bass line connecting each chunk, as they generally alternated with slightly more abstract horror type material such as synthesizer cluster chords and distorted sound effects. As great as the soundtrack is, it is also limited, with only a few tracks. After enough time, I can't blame you for turning it off, but for those first few runs, it complements the atmosphere tremendously, never distracting from what is going on screen. Many sources online state that the original idea for the art style included claymation, inspired by arcade fighting game Primal Rage, but this is a misunderstanding by fans that has even made its way into the wikis. It doesn't help that Brevik himself has retroactively confirmed the use of claymation, even when lead artist Eric Schaefer has already set the record straight in his interviews with Craddock. It's not claymation actually, that story's kind of grown and festered. Really the backgrounds were all 3D from the beginning. There was a popular arcade game at the time, Primal Rage. The game had models made of stop motion animation with articulated limbs, so it was the stop motion graphics that they used from that game that we explored, not the claymation aspect. We talked about maybe making monsters with stop motion models with articulated joints, and we were going to take pictures of those in various poses and pop them in the game, but 3D was a better choice after they found the original idea to be both too expensive and time consuming. The atmosphere continues outside of the game as well. The box speaks for itself as Diablo peers out of the darkness with the game's title soaked in flame. You know exactly what you're getting when you look at it. They could have gone the pulpy route using flames across the entire box or drips of blood, but in what is a delicate choice for these big box 90s games, they've kept it clean, using black as the background and only making use of blood red for highlights. It's surprisingly tasteful compared to the competition, where other games were trying to grab the customer's attention with bright and quite often gaudy artwork. Blizzard took the approach of simplicity, following the discipline of minimizing and refining to create a pure yet striking box art that actually stands out because of this. The ultimate goal of any piece of design is to make an impression. If a design achieves this goal, it's fulfilling its purpose of communicating and insisting upon a particular message. Within the design world, there is a general consensus that less is more. We consider simplicity to ensure a piece of communication has maximum clarity. Now, more than ever, simplicity has become so commonplace that the over-the-top design of these games has become more appealing in how it opposes the overdone minimalism of the late 2010s. Still, the contemporary looking design of Diablo's box art is timeless in a way I didn't expect before analysing the artwork. The manual too drips of darkness and horror. You need only listen to this following passage taken from its first pages, a paragraph from Dante that perfectly sets the mood for the adventure that awaits you after your car ride home engrossing yourself within the reading material. But I, in truth, have been once here before. That savage witch Ericta, she who called the shades back to their bodies, summoned me. My flesh had been long stripped off when she had descended through all the rings of hell, to draw a spirit back from the betrayer's circle. That is the deepest and darkest place, the farthest from the heaven girds all. So rest assured, I know the pathway all. Graphically, the isometric view was a no-brainer. The original inspirations, devoid of real graphics, were played in a top-down view, but Blizzard North knew if they were to modernize the forgotten genre, they were going to have to switch things up. One of the whole points of making a roguelike with modern 3D rendered graphics was that you could make things look really cool, but characters just don't look that great walking around from a top-down perspective. You see the guy's head and shoulders, and that just isn't right to get the full grandeur of the art we were making. The isometric angle puts focus on the design of the creatures and characters without becoming too detached from the inspirations behind those designs. It isn't perfect though. Some of the walls offer translucency to prevent the hiding of objects and monsters, but this isn't continued everywhere. The caves, for example, do not have the same visual effect, obscuring loot, especially as there is no means of rotating the camera. Not that that would be feasible, seeing as the game is rendered in 2D. A rotating camera, even if simplified to 4 main angles as in The Sims, would add additional workload that the team were not in a position to take on, and may not have even solved the issue if the object had fallen in a very unfortunate cranny. Fortunately, a sound plays to let you know when an item has been dropped, so you'll be ready to search for it, and better yet, with Devolution X, you can highlight items a la Diablo 2, which is a necessity of quality of life for myself. This perspective was based entirely on the original XCOM. Brevik reversed engineered XCOM to better understand how it worked. Everything took place on a grid, with each character and object occupying a lone tile, hence Diablo functioned the same way.
One of the very first things that we did is we said, well, what is the look of the game going to be like? And a game that we'd been playing a lot at that time was this game called XCOM. We took a screenshot, which was a difficult thing to do back then, of the game. We used this little cursor box. The shape, the size, and everything is exactly what it was in Diablo. So XCOM's graphics inspired the isometric look. In fact, Diablo originally had a selection box just like this.
This is one of the first artist mockups for Diablo. It isn't a real in-game screenshot, instead an assortment of what graphics had been completed, placed together to appear as if it were gameplay, essentially a test image to see how the level art fits with the monsters, giving the developers an idea of their end goal. It doesn't include any lighting, and yet it somehow ended up circulated everywhere by mistake, to multiple publications and websites, and at one time it was even on a prototype box design.
Well.
One shudders to envisage what repulsive larvae gestates within the gloom as we speak.
Okay.
Helldiver.
I guess we won. I guess we won. Let me just check. Let's see. When does it reset? 2 hours. So at 9. Or I could chase people with the Beatles. Let me see. Let me see. Give me like anything.
For the game until Brevik noticed and had the designers remove it before the game shipped. I find that reading classic reviews genuinely benefits how I view these older titles, as they help me appreciate how seemingly straightforward visual effects were once of note. For example, this review from Chad Hansen at Gamezilla raves over the many nice graphic touches, like when using a spell, a swirling cloud of magic momentarily envelops you. When you break open a barrel and a skeleton doesn't just appear, but actually rises up out of the barrel as if he were crouching in it. And when you get better armor, your on-screen character actually appears different because of it, allowing you to tell which characters in a multiplayer game might be the most helpful or the most dangerous. These are all basic expectations today, but they really help the immersion of a game like Diablo, and it's only by playing even older games can you truly appreciate the advancement. Remember that this is a reimagining of Moria and Angband. The improvement is Goliath. Reviewers particularly fell in love with the monster designs, and to be honest, it's easy to see why. Even in their bit-crushed state, they are full of detail and were clearly designed by artists who love the lore of these creatures. Skeletons, for example, look as if they've been uprooted directly from a Ray Harryhausen film. The only complaint with the monster designs is how limited they are, not by skill nor passion, but by technical limitations. Diablo may have ran fast and on a variety of hardware, but that doesn't change RAM from being filled up. The game could only load in so many assets at a time. With oodles of memory assigned to the dungeon tileset, music and sound effects, the number of monsters each level could hold had to be curtailed. To work around this issue, palette swapping became the go-to method to bolster the bestiary. Instead of just a single skeleton, you could now have tiers of skeleton, tiers of goatmen, tiers of imps, and so on. It was this memory limitation that dictated where mini-bosses would show up too. Brevik remembered how a lot of the roguelike games I played had unique enemies, but they had set stats. We took it a little bit further and gave ours unique properties. You have to really pay attention to what you were doing, as these were tough fights. Of course, not everything has withstood the test of time. There are several FMV sequences that were nice back in 1996, but with today's graphics and video sequences, they are outdated. It's not a problem with the game, just one of the few aspects that hasn't aged well. In comparison to the 3D games from this era, isometric games like Diablo always tend to age better as long as the original artwork itself was excellent, which it thankfully is. In some ways, I would actually say that it aged better than Diablo 2 did. By being fully 2D, the transition to HD with mods has kept it it crisp in a way that D2 couldn't achieve until its remake, which isn't a fair comparison seeing as that came with fully remade artwork, an advantage Condor Inc.'s original game didn't have. Wait, who's Condor Inc.? Didn't Blizzard North make Diablo? Similar to Brevik, the Schaefer brothers had fond memories of growing up playing Dungeons & Dragons, and who was it with an Apple II Plus home computer that they fell in love with video games? After college, they began their working life at FM Waves, a small company specialized in producing digital business materials. Max was hired to design clip art for use in standardized business software, like the now forgotten Microsoft Publisher. If you remember making birthday cards and the like in this bad boy, then you're as old as me. Max would sit at the computer using Adobe Illustrator to create border after border. There's a good chance that a homemade leaflet from your local small community business was adorned with one of these. Through his recommendation, FM Waves hired his brother to assist him. Designing 90s clip art may not be the most fulfilling creative job, but the Schaefers were content with the paycheck. Still, it was the last place they expected to create video games, until a chance meeting between Ephraim Wyeth, FM Waves co-founder, and Jack Trammell, the head of Atari, changed everything. Wyeth's father had hailed from the same Polish childhood town as Trammell. Soon they had hit it off, and by luck, the Atari head asked if FM Waves were interested in game development. The firm had no experience, Atari were just that desperately in need of games for their new Lynx handheld console. Not one to turn down a business opportunity, Wyeth agreed. Within 72 hours, the entrepreneur found himself pitching ideas to the Atari board. Out of his 12 proposals, they agreed on one, the emancipation of Gordo 106, the
My brother, that's the oldest trick in the book. Never chase for the bounty. Bruh. Leave a guy without the bounty behind and just like make him ambush them. There you go. Challenge completed.
Mutated lab monkey. The Schaefers were assigned as artists for the game. While they may have only been skilled in designing clip art, the brothers leapt at this unforeseen opportunity to cut their teeth in game development. Soon after Gordo came into the picture, FM Waves hired a programmer fresh out of college to write the game's code. That was David Brevik. Brevik had always wanted to make games, but his parents were concerned about his career prospects in an industry that was very much still in its infancy as he turned 18 in 1986. To appease his parents and strengthen his skill set, he studied for a computer science degree. It was in a newspaper ad where Brevik answered FM Wave's call for programmers. Together, Brevik and the Schaefer brothers worked away on Gordo 106, a rather forgettable platformer starring a rebellious primate rescuing caged animals from an evil science facility. Seeing Gordo develop from a back-of-the-napkin idea into a real working game was a transformative moment for the young developers. They had achieved their childhood dreams. The result of that dream was doomed to fail. Despite both companies being happy with the result, Atari's ill-fated Lynx was unable to survive the onslaught brought on by Nintendo's Game Boy. Yet that didn't matter to the trio. They had realized their life's goal, their true passion. They knew game development was the job for them. The three men had grown a strong friendship over the development cycle, bonding over their shared experiences in tabletop and computer gaming. It wasn't long until they were postulating about a potential future. Why make games for another company, especially a clip art firm, when they could be making games themselves? The idea remained just that for a time, but it did have a name: Project Condor. Unbeknownst to our protagonists, FM Waves was in deep water, hence YF's unlikely pivoting of the company. Gordo 106 wasn't enough to save them. It couldn't get past its financial troubles and was unable to pay employees, with Brevik's checks bouncing only a few months after he had started working there. The Schaefers were more comfortable and willing to eat a pay cut if it meant steady money. Brevik, though, wasn't so amenable to the idea of going down with the sinking ship, leaving the company to search for another job.
It was a great introduction to the video game industry for a lot of reasons, but my paychecks started bouncing and the company was going out of business. So here it was a real introduction to the video game industry, not only because it was the first thing that I was working on, but also the instability of the video game industry really came to light instantly, right?
Hence, Project Condor found itself shelved. Brevik found a spot as a programmer for Iguana Entertainment, coding for console versions of NBA Jam 1993. Aero the Acrobat is the title that Brevik finds himself calling his first real game, where he was truly allowed full creativity to create what he and the team wanted, rather than following ideas and design documents given to him from others. It was his time working on Aero that taught him a valuable lesson in game balance.
Oh, I learned a lot working on the product. I remember it pretty fondly. I also remember that one of the biggest things I learned is that you can become an expert at your own game. And so we made it really, really hard because we were used to playing it over and over and over again. We kept making it harder and harder. And then eventually we were experts at the game and we could do all this stuff, but other people played it for the first time like, oh my God, this is so hard.
That likely explains Brevik's keen insistence on maintaining his MOM test moving forward, avoiding the pitfall of tweaking difficulty while forgetting the end user. Roughly a year later, Iguana's CEO decided to move its main office from California to Texas. Not wanting to make the transition himself, Brevik re-established contact with the Schaefer brothers to ask a question. You guys want to start that company? They had always fantasized about it while working on Gordo, and after getting all the pieces into place, a tiny software development company under the temporary name of Condor Incorporated was launched. The three had little assets between them, a computer each and a small nest egg of capital. It was barely enough to run the corporation, but that didn't stop them. The card up their sleeve was Brevik, specifically his past networking. The time at Iguana had been fortuitous, and he had made valuable contacts at several game publishers. The story goes that in Condor's very first organizational meeting, one of those contacts got in touch. Huddled around the phone, the Schaefer bros listened in on Brevik's conversation. On the other end was David Siller, an executive at Sunsoft, who had noticed the young programmer's talent. Aero the Acrobat was Siller's brainchild, and his time working with Brevik on the platformer had left a very fond impression. He was in need of enthusiastic and passionate young developers for a round of promising IPs that were sure to sell. Between Scooby-Doo, an Aerosmith game, or a Justice League Street Fighter clone, for the comic book nerds at Condor, there was only one clear answer. Work began on the Sega Genesis version of the DC superhero game immediately. The funding from the new publisher gave Condor the opportunity to grow, renting a nearby open plan office space and hiring local talent to fulfill the 1-year development time promise they made to Silla, and talent they needed, not just because making a game within a year with only 3 developers would be a big ask, but also due to their lack of skill set. Max was humble enough to acknowledge that even with his and Eric's experience as working artists, they were in no position to create artwork to the standard expected from a superhero game. In response, they brought on Michio Okamura and Kelly Johnson as additional artists, hired Richard Sayes as a programmer, and a bit later, after his everlasting persistence, they brought on Matt Ullman to handle sound and music composition. From the offset, the boys were forward thinking. Condor was to be run far more idealistic and contemporary than the stereotypical concept of an office. There were no programmers penned up in cubicles, nor a discernible hierarchy. At Condor, there were only gamers. They could shout across the room at each other, play games on company time, and challenge each other to competitive NHL matches. It was surely the dream job for a bunch of young devs. As Brevik puts it, we had no project management or methods or agile development, just some guys on a shoestring budget and a prayer. Work on Justice League putted along until halfway through production, Sunsoft fell on hard times as a result of an ill-advised investment into a multi-million-dollar golf resort near Palm Springs. David Siller, Brevik's contact, jumped ship to Universal Interactive, while Sun Corporation sacked the majority of its software-focused workforce, maintaining only a skeleton crew to tie up operations. The Justice League project was thrown into turmoil until Acclaim stepped in to pick up the publishing rights, transferring all of Sunsoft's abandoned projects to themselves. The game was saved, and Condor continued on, releasing the fighting game on schedule. They had done it again, from 3 young men with a computer each to their names into a fully fledged game development company with an official release under their belt. Unfortunately, Justice League Task Force isn't anything special, receiving mostly negative reviews. Electronic Gaming Monthly scored Condor's Genesis version a 5.875 out of 10, criticizing the poor animations, limited number of moves, and clunky controls that made executing special moves too much work to be any fun. A very damning problem for a Street Fighter clone to have. Possibly due to these poor reviews, the game didn't sell particularly well either, much to the chagrin of the employees at Condor. As a hiring incentive and a means of keeping team passion and morale high, Brevik and the Schaefers had promised everyone a share of the profits. The better the game, the higher the bonus they would earn. As a premise, it seemed sound. In execution, however, they received very little for their efforts. An anonymous employee recalled how we'd all been told we'd be making thousands of extra dollars, but after Justice League, if this is how the bonus situation works, we're never gonna make any money.
It was tough going at first, and then we're barely making ends meet, barely paying the bills, and the company is kind of small and struggling and whatnot.
Still, for some of the young employees, any bonus was welcome, even if it only amounted to a small percentage of their overall salary. With the turmoil surrounding the game's publishing, Okamura was just happy that the game was released at all. The additional royalty check was icing on the cake for having his name in the credits. Condor wasn't the only developer working on the Justice League IP at the time. Some 400 miles to the south, another studio had picked up a contract to create another version of Justice League Task Force, the Super Nintendo port, designed by Silicon and Synapse. Before the game's release, Condor had attended CES as a part of the then still existing Sunsoft booth. On a CRT TV, a demo played of their Genesis fighting game. Alongside their TV was another, playing a nigh-on identical game running on completely different hardware. Despite having never talked to each other and only working from the same basic brief, the game seemed as though they could have been developed in tandem, demonstrating similar design philosophies and techniques between the companies. Brevik took this chance to introduce himself. The two studios quickly discovered a shared passion for PC gaming and how they believed the PC offered far more freedom than the potentially more profitable consoles they had both found themselves working with. Silicon and Synapse had already partly developed a PC game of their own and excitedly invited Condor over to check it out. They gathered around a computer in an out-of-the-way meeting room at the expo. The monitor fired up, revealing a game that was about to change the future of everyone in that room: Warcraft. Only a short time after this chance meeting, Silicon and Synapse rebranded to Blizzard Entertainment. While Condor enjoyed the challenge of creating the contracted fighting game, the founders had greater ambitions. Brevik presented a thick stack of paper to his team, telling them that this was the dream game they'd someday make. As Condor was originally forming, Brevik and the Schaefers whittled away at their plan for a PC RPG. They wanted to return to the origins of the CRPG genre: random dungeons, random loot, and easy to understand gameplay. No long stories, no crazy lore, no deep character creator. To them, it was high time that the RPG genre's focus on narrative over gameplay ended. The idea behind the name Diablo existed as far back as Brevik's first sighting of Mount Diablo, when he moved to the San Francisco area during his high school years. Not well versed in Spanish, the meaning was lost on him until he realized during a language class that it translated to devil. I opened this video claiming how Diablo is one of the most documented video games out there, and this is further proof of that. Not many games have leaked versions of their original design documents floating around out there for everyone to peruse. Better yet, we can guarantee the authenticity of this document as it came from Brevik himself. Following a presentation at GDC, he was kind enough to upload the initial design doc, originally used as a means of pitching the game to interested publishers, opposed to a direct plan they would follow letter by letter. Many of these infant ideas warped and twisted into completely different mechanics, which only makes this document all the more interesting. Even at this early venture, they had mapped out the required deliverables, including the number of monsters and frames of animation that would need to be created, as well as 3D cinematics, title screens, character creation screens, and an inventory screen, even accommodating music for an opening theme, atmospheric music to accompany gameplay, and sound effects for fighting, casting, and walking. Clearly, the team wanted to hit the ground running and inspire confidence in publishers that they knew what they were doing. This wasn't a pipe dream dreamt up with no idea on how to achieve the desired outcome. They were presenting themselves as seasoned professionals, even if that wasn't entirely the case. Despite the swaths of changes I'll soon highlight, at its core, Diablo remained true to the ideals of Condor's initial plan. The introduction reads, "Diablo captures familiar fantasy elements within a unique structure designed for maximum replayability, expandability, and versatility. Diablo fills a neglected niche in the computer game market. As games today substitute gameplay with multimedia extravaganzas and strive towards needless scale and complexity, we seek to reinvigorate the hack-and-slash feel-good gaming audience." The three classes were the same as release, but named the Fighter, Thief, and Magician, and there was going to be the possibility of choosing subclasses, which later was accommodated by removing locked items and abilities altogether. All classes were free to cast magic, shoot a bow, or wear armor, just as we have come to expect from the final game. Designed for turn-based gameplay, the fighter could attack more often in a single turn, the thief would move further per turn and had a stealth advantage, while the magician would be able to cast more powerful spells. Initial attribute distribution was to be random too, again reflecting traditional tabletop design, with dice rolls dictating a player's starting stats. Beside this system, less finicky players could take advantage of a pre-generated character, with static stats becoming the final game's only option. The lore was as bare bones as can be at this point. What was written was mostly abandoned too, such as character customization allowing players to choose from 5 or 6 human player races separated into hill people, forest people, etc., each bringing with them advantages and disadvantages. This is far removed from the sleek ARPG that we know, far closer instead to the competition they later did not wish to align themselves with. Even with the goal of stepping away from how long-winded some 90s CRPGs had become, it's clear to see that the team had not yet decided entirely on what should be cut or kept. An inner conflict on what a CRPG needs before it becomes unrecognizable. This extends to the 4 schools of magic for mages, and a general school that all characters would have access to, that latter part pointing to the final result, with a magic system open to all classes, with the schools evolving into the pages of the spellbook, separated instead by their strength rather than the type of sorcery they fall under. The original town was to have a player home where the hero could store extraneous items and gold. As we know, this later returned in the sequels as the stash containers, and it is its inclusion in this design document that makes me feel no shame in using Gillian's stash mechanic included with Devolution X. Taking another page out of the mechanics that would later be included in Diablo 2, as the hero leveled up, they were to unlock new skills. This section doesn't so much describe skill trees, a mechanic Brevik actually says was invented for Diablo 2, but it does allude to the otherwise forgettable skill system of Diablo 1. One system that remained as described is the randomization. Stylized as DRLG, the dynamic random level generation system would randomize rooms, corridors, traps, treasures, monsters, and stairway location. As in the final game, the system was to be built around central set pieces, such as a crypt complex, allowing the implementation of puzzles and more complex traps, but also to aid in maintaining the thematic elements of the current dungeon level. While those complex traps never came to be, this was at the crux of Diablo's design, what made it a modern reimagining of its influences, as well as being the selling technology of this pitch document. It seems to me that with that particular initialization, Condor hoped that this tech would excite publishers in how it could be implemented into other games, a means of generating huge amounts of content on the fly. Maintaining the road bias, all characters were to be at the whims of permadeath. If one of those arrows ends up killing the fighter, that character will be erased completely from the hard drive and the player must start from scratch. Fortunately, permadeath was removed due to how punishing it was for players, but it would return later in the hardcore mode of Diablo 2. The story was to have an open ending to allow varied sequels, again to delight publishers with the promise of sequels and new IPs, but also to allow for the most controversial concept, microtransactions. A decade before DLC entered our general lexicon, Condor Inc. were planning on releasing small bundles of content for a low entry fee, all with the intention of pushing players towards buying it all in the never-ending goal of a perfect collection. Inspired by still to this day popular card collector game and money sink Magic the Gathering, the game packs would be sold near checkout counters in stores, akin to those card games, with an estimated $5 price tag, pretty well in line with the price for map packs sold for FPS games at the time. The pack would include a floppy disk holding the micro content, and collector type art cards were planned to be included to further enhance the sense of collectability. And just like Magic the Gathering, new seasons of content could be released for players to collect with a unique theme, such as Dark Nightmares or Holy Avengers. This is all sounding mighty familiar, huh? Diablo could have very well been the world's first live service game, with years of content being released. It was nearly 15 years later when the Diablo series itself would fall victim to the microtransactions it first proposed here. All of this was intended to get investors on board. They needed to get capital into Condor so they could start realizing their fantasy, possibly hoping that this predatory business idea would have publishers clambering over themselves to be the ones that had their name on the box. While that plan didn't succeed, the Condor founders were right in thinking that this was a great opportunity to make mountains of dosh, even if it was at the expense of the gaming audience's wallet. As they say themselves, the expansion cards would provide additional and continuous revenues with minimal investment. Just as with microtransactions today, this content was all about expandability and replay value. Replay value being the key to Diablo's success. They would add new magic items, creatures, traps, as well as complete scenarios to be incorporated directly into the DRLG engine. New tileset themes from Goblin Caves to Living Fungus worlds could be added to the algorithm, creating new dungeons to be explored and conquered. This still requires players to actually interact with the game to discover their new content, but they knew better than that. With the document acknowledging that a character should have a goodie directly placed into their inventory for instant gratification. Worse still, they even planned the dreaded pay-to-win model that plagues many modern competitive games. The initial plan for multiplayer was to be limited to 2 players, with a key focus on PvP in special arena dungeons, where participants would pit their characters against each other. The mode would have a user-defined time limit to force players to move quickly, and if they did not specify a move within their turn timer, they'd lose the opportunity to move during their turn. As the document specifies, and I quote, "The ability to play against friends will add to the appeal of the expansion packs as players will seek the upper hand versus their friends." Nostradamus over here predicting everything we hate about modern gaming. This isn't to say Condor are somehow to blame for these practices, they were an inevitability, especially if a group of 20-year-olds can come up with it. We can only be thankful that publishers at the time weren't savvy to the potential such a system had, although one could argue, with its place on store shelves and not at the convenient click of a button, there was a chance that this never would have been such a success in comparison. While they were pioneers in one business idea, when it came to running a game development company, they were admittedly clueless. "We were terrible businessmen," said Brevet. "We weren't even paying our taxes. I found out later that that was a bad idea." Rather naively, they set the game's budget at a meager $300,000. With a team of 15, it doesn't take a genius to see that the maths doesn't work out for the planned 1-year dev cycle. CES wasn't just an opportunity to showcase Justice League for Brevik, it was the perfect
What is the difference? Face of Faradun, mind the traitor. Serpent's tongue, scorpion stinger. Either way, now you pay with your life. Sand and steel, fire and fire, flesh and bone. Insane? Shut your mouth, traitor!
Shit show.
a chance to pitch Diablo to anyone that would listen. To his annoyance, however, while many were ready to listen, as soon as they heard that the game was a PC-based RPG, their eyes glazed over and ears shuttered. Sales within the RPG genre had fallen considerably since its golden age in the 80s and early 90s, with Goliaths of the industry reigning supreme. Only Bethesda's Arena had been able to make a splash as a new IP. Even then, most gamers stayed with the safe bets: Ultima, Might and Magic, and Wizardry. Publishers simply did not see invested into a new IP by an unknown, unestablished developer as a worthy or profitable endeavor.
RPGs were dead. We had a really difficult time proposing Diablo to different companies because the very first thing that everybody would say are RPGs are dead. Meaning they just aren't selling. Nobody wants them anymore. They're too small of a market for us to even bother.
This lull in the market was partly brought on by oversaturation. If you remember the Guitar Hero and Rock Band phase, you'll know what I'm talking about. By the mid-90s, SSI had begun to squander its license, producing title after title of buggy, forgettable games. The early 90s were a creative drought for RPGs, and store shelves teemed with tedious, derivative titles. Some companies wouldn't even talk to us, Brevik admitted. We were free jokers with a radical idea for a game. People literally laughed at us because we had no PC experience and wanted to do an RPG. CES was a bust then, but it wasn't for naught. They had met that passionate team at Silicon and Synapse. Brevik had mentioned to them that they had put together a pitch for a computer RPG. Maybe, when they had time, they could hear Condor's pitch for the game. Alan Adham, one of Blizzard's original founders, confided in him that Blizzard needed to keep their heads down to finish Warcraft, which their owners, software conglomerate Davidson and Associates, wanted on store shelves by Christmas. However, he told Brevik in confidence that once that game launched, he would love to hear more about Diablo. Blizzard was run by gamers. Unlike the publishers who only cared that sales were down, they saw beyond the numbers and were excited by the idea of a modern take on the genre. It was that shared philosophy that ensured the two development teams hit it off. It was only natural that they would. Like Condor, everyone at Blizzard was a gamer. In fact, it was policy that they had to be. Bill Roper, head of recruiting, was surprised at how hard it was to find the right employees with such a strict policy. The 90s were a different time, and gaming wasn't as widespread a hobby as it would later become, not with adults at least, and a 12-year-old Mario fan wasn't likely to produce decent work for at least another 6 years. Some would say Blizzard's strict gamer-only hiring practices precludes the company from acquiring top-notch talent, but Roper maintained that sticking to it was of top priority, even if it was heartbreaking to interview a gifted artist who didn't know anything about games. We'd love to hire those guys, but they don't play games, and we can't teach someone to like games. In the case of the artiste, for example, Roper explains how it's invaluable if an artist can actually think about how their work is going to look in the game environment. As Blizzard worked on Warcraft, Condor, not so fortunate as to be supported by a 800 employee strong software publisher, returned to contract work, developing a version of NFL Quarterback Club for the Game Boy and landing a lucrative $500,000 greenlight for a 3D football game set to release on Panasonic's doomed home video console, the 3DO M2. It was a rehash of the Gordo 106 situation, developing for a system that had no legs to begin with. Still, the money was good. Nearing the Christmas period, magazines were starting to rave and build up hype around a unique strategy game coming out of California. Everyone at Condor wanted to know more about Warcraft. That brief preview at CES had done nothing to quell their appetite. Rick Says would continue to bug Brevik, exclaiming, "Call them up, get a build of Warcraft for us." Adham had been emailing back and forth with Brevik intermittently since their chance meeting at the expo, and as Brevik's desire to play Warcraft grew, he could wait no longer, calling Adham asking if they had any spare copies lying around. The call soon snowballed into discussing the Diablo pitch, and by January of 1995, just after Warcraft had shipped, Adham was on the flight to visit Condor. Pat Wyatt, Vice President of Research and Development at Blizzard, was tasked with finding more projects for the company to publish. With Davidson and Associates breathing down his neck, he leaped at the opportunity to join the enthusiastic Adham in visiting Condor. Within the first hour of the presentation, Brevik knew they were in love with the idea. They got where we were going and what we were doing, and we were happy we had business. We were finally going to make an original PC game. Both Blizzard execs agreed on their flight home that Diablo was a great idea, and it would sit perfectly under Blizzard's upcoming range of PC games. But they had some caveats. 1. Multiplayer was a must, and it needed to be expanded beyond the 1v1 PvP laid out in the pitch. And 2. It had to be real-time. Turn-based was out. Warcraft's real-time strategy had proved that. There was no question in their minds that those were the things that had to be changed to make the game cool. Happy with the lowball $300,000 price tag, Davison and Associates signed off on the pitch, as long as the money was paid out based on milestones hit. Condor were elated and signed Diablo to be published under Blizzard. Due to this trickle of cash and being an upstart studio that needed to keep the lights on, Condor would have to plan out Diablo's development while simultaneously working on other licensed games. But even then, financial troubles reared their ugly head, as they often do in these stories. The $300,000 was stretched even thinner when Condor realized that the game would require at least 2 years of development time. The problem was solved at first by more contract work for the 3DO, but developing more games required hiring more devs. It was a solution that bred more problems and more negative cash flow. That was until Blizzard's owner, Old Davison and Associates, offered to acquire the studio based on Blizzard's rapport for the plucky Diablo devs. In fact, the 3DO company offered double as much for Condor as Blizzard had, but Condor's sense of kinship with Blizzard won out. There were just 2 problems. 1, the name would have to change, and 2, the royalty scheme based on game profits had to go. Davison would not adhere to the bonus system Condor had devised, and as Davison was now in control of the payroll, it was on them to dictate how employees were financially incentivized. The scheme was stripped. In its place were stock options split between the employees, ideal for decreasing employee turnover and maintaining a vested interest, not so great for directly rewarding them when a game sells like hotcakes. Of course, in hindsight, we know that there were thousands to be made from the massive success of Diablo, but with money tight, the possibilities of even finishing the game hung on the sale of Condor. When it came to the name, some were happier to see it changed than others. Condor was always meant to be a temporary name anyway, a placeholder carried over from their early days. Brevik showed the most concern. They wanted us to be called Blizzard. I wanted us to be something separate. We still wanted our own identity. That's why Blizzard North made sense. We were part of a whole, but still separate. Happy with that compromise, Brevik relayed how he felt that they got us and got Diablo, and we were so close in culture and beliefs, it was a win-win for both firms. Blizzard could help with Diablo's development even more now too. Developers from the South team would chip in to give advice. Dwayne Stinnett, an artist from Blizzard, recalls tutoring Condor's art team on how to best take their rough concept art from a drawing and into a finished model or texture for use in the game, providing them invaluable knowledge gained from the development of Warcraft. After the switch from Condor to Blizzard North was finalized, all of a sudden the press started to get very interested in Blizzard's new sister studio. The hype train swung into full gear, and Diablo was plastered over every PC gaming magazine you could find. Some fans were surprised to see an RPG in Blizzard's new lineup of games. Former managing director Michael Morhaime remembers the shock. After Warcraft, people assumed that they were only about strategy games. Naturally, what fans didn't realize was that while Blizzard North were hard at work on Diablo, Blizzard themselves had not changed course, with all hands on deck creating one of their most beloved games to this day. If Warcraft had put Blizzard on the map, it was Warcraft 2 that cemented Blizzard as a force to be reckoned within PC gaming. It was their first game to hit 1 million units sold, and to put that number into perspective for the time, only pop culture exploding outliers like Myst could claim such distinction before this. With this newfound fame, it was clear that under Davidson, Blizzard North were in a far better position to make Diablo a success. As Kelly Johnson explains, the boxes on the shelves don't represent the best products. They represent whoever made a deal to get that space. Space went to the highest bidder. The bigger you were, the more games you could have on the shelf. That's why our deal with Davison was important. They had deals with everybody. We were guaranteed to get on the shelf. With funding secured, Blizz North could put all of their focus into Diablo, and development continued at a good pace, aiming for a Christmas 1996 release date. There was only one problem, and it was a big one. The relationship between the two devs teams was contentious, as is the case in any passionate project. Now as a sister studio, Blizzard had become directly involved in Diablo's development, and they were entirely against its turn-based nature. After their undebatable success in revolutionizing the real-time strategy genre with Warcraft 1, and now the recently released 2, Blizzard were very keen to transition Diablo into real-time as well, which Brevik directly opposed. If this was to be the modernization of Rogue and Moria, it had to be done right, so turn-based gameplay to him was non-negotiable. He adored the strategy behind the important decisions and the inherent tension that arose when things didn't go your way. Diablo remained a turn-based game for months of its development, governed by a complex system where each turn was divided into short units of time visualized to the player as action points, with spells and attacks taking different lengths of time to complete. From descriptions, I must assume that it worked somewhat similarly to Fallout 1 and 2's turn-based implementation. During catch-up meetings to discuss their progress, Blizzard continued the push for real-time over the span of a few months. Brevik wasn't convinced, holding firm that Blizzard was wrong. This wasn't one of their strategy games that could transition over so easily. Diablo needed to make the player sweat, keep them on the edge of their seats. What are you talking about? No, this isn't one of your strategy games. His arguments fell on deaf ears. Yeah, but you know, real-time will be better. To prove to Brevik that they wouldn't change their mind, Blizzard took an internal vote. Only 2 employees voted for turn-based over real-time. It was a done decision. No matter what, Blizz North would have to change the game on a fundamental level. Adham called up the San Mateo branch to tell Brevik the news. Look, you've got to make this real-time. After Adham's call, Brevik took a vote of his own. If this relationship between the companies was to work, he had to know that this was a decision his team agreed with, even if he didn't. Piling the Blizzard North team into their small kitchen, the developers dictated their future. Nearly everyone agreed with Blizzard. Turn-based was old news, outdated and slow. The late 90s was removing itself from the traditions of PC gaming. Real-time was the future, for a time at least, and Diablo was going to join in on the mass abandonment of long-established methods. Brevik could see the writing on the wall and wasn't going to force the team to persist in a direction he knew they didn't believe in. The problem was, many of the systems had already been designed and built, and they were turn-based. He had no idea how long it would take to modify the engine against what it was coded for. Confident that it would delay the project, he made this clear in a callback to Adham, laying it on thick to Blizzard how this change would slow production and cost a lot more than the original planned budget. To his surprise, Blizzard were happy to proceed, believing that it was the right decision to make. Brevik had managed to negotiate extra payment for his company and buckled down for what he predicted to be weeks of extra work. Fortunately for him, he had wildly overestimated that time investment. On the following Friday afternoon, after everyone had gone home for the weekend, Brevik stayed in the office to tackle the problem head on. His first solution was the simplest. He could fake a real-time game by reducing the turn timers to the lowest the engine could handle, only a few fractions of a second. In a few hours, he tested his new faux real-time demo, quickly realizing that Blizzard and his colleagues were right all along. This was the right way to go.
And I can remember it like it was yesterday. It's like the most clear moment of my life and my career. I was playing as the warrior and I had this club in my hand. I clicked the mouse and the character walked over and smashed a skeleton apart. And I was like, oh my God, this is so amazing. This is so much better. Yeah, this definitely has to be real time.
In that moment, action RPGs, at least in their isometric point-and-click form, were dominated ever since by Diablo and the formula of its sequels. The work wasn't over, however. The real-time modification would still require extensive tweaking to reach its final form, but for a first run, coded in a game development cycle's equivalent of a blink of the eye, it just worked. A lot of the turn-based stuff was going to be movement, drinking potions, casting spells, things that were just translated seamlessly into the real-time game. There weren't any features that made us say, well, now that it's not turn-based, we can't do this thing. This whole fiasco led to a game that sparked an IP still running over 25 years later, when it could have just as easily been forgotten like the games it was inspired by. Diablo was Blizzard North's baby, yet one cannot ignore the influence Blizzard had on the game. And this isn't to mention the extensive work the publisher did to help write the multiplayer code or create the cutscenes, both stories of which we'll cover later. Diablo, with its dark and detailed aesthetic to its randomized design, was absolutely Project Condor's creation, but Blizzard were forethinking and stubborn enough to force the changes required to make it truly special. There was a rare synergy between the two studios that helped produce a product that would have otherwise been inferior. It is with this switch that a schism was blown for the RPG fandom at the time. Dr. Matt Barton recalls in his article on then-gamasutra.com how Diablo was regularly lauded as the beginning of the end of role-playing games. The game's popularity with virgin CRPG gamers drew sneers from long-term fans of the genre. Blizzard had reduced the often intimidating CRPG genre to its bare essentials, then poured on the eye candy. To some, Diablo had streamlined the genre too much, removing the depth and immersion many loved. The oldsters scoffed, dismissing the game as a clickfest. Meanwhile, fans of games like Sierra's Quest for Glory were turned off by the lack of characters and interesting scenarios. For them, the constant clicking and killing brought little more than tedium. Players even complained about the game's relatively short duration. Gamers accustomed to the hundreds of hours required to sloth through an Ultima weren't happy about a game that could be completed in a mere 2 days. This is all valid criticism had Diablo been the downfall of the hardcore RPG, but as time has told, the CRPG genre of old still prevails. It too suffered streamlining at times, however, gamers' love for complexities and gameplay decisions has kept those games alive in one form or another. This is all due to the blending of genres not being the death of one, but instead the rebirth of another. Diablo didn't kill the CRPG, it brought back the ARPG into relevance, which ironically enough the CRPGs of Bard Tale and the SSI Goldbox games had mostly killed. Speaking to Game Center about the merging and birth of new genres in the late 90s, Diablo's producer Bill Roper spoke of the decision to create a product that merged genres. As RPGs began to follow a list of tropes and establish a stereotypical design language, it was the games that pushed their genres in new directions, creating new ones or revolutionizing old ones that floated to the top. By combining turn-based role-playing games with fast-paced action games, Diablo ended up as a truly unique gaming experience. When asked if Blizzard foresaw any possible obstacles in amalgamating the two genres, Roper recalls that whether people really considered Diablo an RPG or not was secondary to making the game as fun as possible. This is the natural evolution of any genre, be it in gaming, film, music or literature. Roper using Alien as a perfect example. It mixed science fiction, horror and westerns to totally revive a sagging sci-fi marketplace. It's natural to look to what has worked in the past and bring multiple great ideas together. Blizzard wasn't scared to annoy the traditionalists in their goal of creating fun games, even if said traditionalist was the lead programmer on the project. And hey, even Brevik put his hands up straight away and admitted he was wrong. As brilliant as this change was for the rebirth of the ARPG genre, many of the game's issues, especially with combat, are sparked from this too. Brevik never removed the turn-based mechanism, he tweaked it to the point of being only a few frames long, giving the illusion of a real-time game. This is immediately noticeable when you go into the game with this knowledge, and is also one of the key reasons why fan-made conversions and engine rewrites tend to feel crisper and less laggy than the vanilla game. Not to say that the vanilla experience is unbearably slow, only that in comparison, you can feel it. Akin to the flip between 60 and 144 FPS in gaming. For a viewer, it may not be perceivable, but for the player, it is. Not to mention the grid-based design is a direct result of its previous nature as a turn-based game. It is this that will be the most obvious difference between Diablo 1 and 2 when playing them back to back. You are less free in your movement, it feels clunky, less organic. A few problems occur too, the most annoying of which being the tendency for spells to fly right through enemies seemingly missing. At the time, I thought this was highlighting an immune creature, but I would later discover that my character just had terrible aim. Even with over 100% in your chance to hit, if a spell is shot at an angle off grid, it will miss an opponent, even if it visually interacts with their sprite. Another issue is the lack of mobility, not just in the player's speed of movement, which can be adjusted in the menu of most mods, but mainly in how cumbersome the movement mechanics can be. Locked to a grid, ranged characters will find themselves kiting enemies in squares so as to avoid the off-grid missile missing bug I just mentioned, and warriors will be forced to corner mobs, and even then, based on how tight the corner is and how the grid is aligned, more times than not, the monster will be able to skirt to the side and avoid your trap. This is exasperated by the lack of mobility options. Phase and teleport are your only means of switching things up, but with their high mana cost, they will be locked to the sorcerer for most playthroughs, and even then, these abilities are best tied to wide range magic that isn't reliant on accuracy. Blizzard North were all too aware of this shortcoming, which is why the game engine was wholly revamped for the sequel. Back to the game itself, Diablo's first dungeon levels in the Cathedral's tombs are noticeably unchallenging. It's a tutorial level in the modern sense, a gateway into the game where the player can get accustomed to the controls but not necessarily the best method of play. This is handled very differently to other RPGs from the time, say with Arena and Daggerfall. The Imperial Sewer and Privateer's Hold are there to test you. They guarantee that you're ready for the rest of the game, to ensure that you have chosen or built a competent enough character and understand the mechanics well enough to survive the ordeal and make it to safety. Both methods have their merits. If you can survive the first dungeons in those games, you'll be able to beat the rest of the game given enough time and effort. Not so with Diablo, where instead you are, in a way, handheld through baby's first combat scenario. Only later will your mettle be tested. They're both valid, however one objectively leaves a better first impression with the majority of people. You need not look far into internet discussions to see that Arena and Daggerfall are infamously remembered for the brutality of their opening dungeon crawl. A lot of people never make it past those sections, even if for seasoned gamers they're not that bad. Diablo has no such infamy until a mini-boss on level 2, with Blizzard North's goal of stripping back the RPG to basics and developing a gameplay loop anyone could understand. Making the Cathedral easy was the way to go. As we enter the crypts once used by the residents of Tristram to store their dead, a darkness swallows much of our visibility. Returning adventures to these first 4 levels on repeat playthroughs or higher difficulty runs leaves these stone walls feeling cozy relative to what lies below. Wooden doors separate many of the chambers, and there's a common feature of a large 24 by 24 tile room with 4 pillars and a random assortment of rectangular rooms shooting off of it, connected by corridors. Unprecedented replayability. That was the goal. Diablo is noted for its high degree of randomization. Everything from the dungeon layout, the type of and location of the monsters, and even the quests are randomized, ensuring not only surprises in every play session, but also upping the game's overall replay value.
Your experience is going to be different than anybody else's forever. Your character that you've made is unique. Just because of the way the trillions of combinations that exist out there, nobody will have the same experience twice.
It's this random nature for why some refer to this game as a roguelike, as intended by the developers given their inspirations. The randomization also serves to make each player's game their own. Players feel an ownership of the game experience in that they are actively generating a unique story for themselves. It's enjoyable to tell friends about what you have just done in the game, knowing for sure that they have not done exactly the same as you. Simply following an online walkthrough won't help us accomplish a goal without some degree of our own effort. Eric Schaefer uses XCOM as his main example for why randomized elements help a player to grow a closer attachment to a game. I wasn't relying on some designer to make a fun level, it was my own level. It became mine instead of somebody else's plan for me. Not only does each section of Diablo's dungeon have unique art and obstacles, but they also have their own rules for random generation. For instance, the caves tend to be composed of large open areas with tight passages surrounding, whereas the catacombs host hallways that go all the way around the rooms. As each area is specifically designed, it essentially meant that the team had to write 4 times the code, a big challenge. Brevik explained the work behind the algorithms during a Diablo post-mortem, discussing how the game is entirely tile-based. At the start of each generation, a large set piece would be placed first, then the surrounding rooms and corridors could branch off of that at will, choosing to connect to each other or not. Once the rooms were placed, chests, barrels and other objects would be plonked in logical locations, and the monsters dropped in last, with the pool of enemies plucked from a list of appropriate mobs that fit the expected player level and dungeon art style. It wasn't all smooth sailing from there. As is the case with any algorithm-based project, the bugs were many and difficult to pinpoint and fix. The cave levels had lots of graphical issues, some of which were never actually fixed, but instead hidden by exceptions. This brute force method became the standard approach of repairing problems with the generation. It was easier to tell the algorithm.
The traitor Balbala has been sentenced to 1,000 years of suffering as a jinn in this place of her dishonor. Let no woman or man of Marika's blood enter her prison before her time is served.
O, dobro jutro. Dobro jutro.
O, dobro jutro, gospodine.
Kako si slabo?
Kako si milija, čoveče Boži?
Isto pitanje tebi. Dobro, dobro.
Ja se razboravljam, pijem kafu i gledam ove klase za Remnant 2. Znaš, ono, beginner, pičke mamine, gledam guide, gameplay i tako da.
Šta si uzeo igru?
Nisam još, pa nemam pare. Trčkam još. Valjda ću da se snađem, valjda ću da se snađem lagano. Nego gledam, znaš, da li ću da je, mada hoću, ja čim igraš ti, brate, Kecma, ne znam, ko još ima, brate, od nas ovdje?
Ja ti Kecma. Ostali...
Su ono, da, razumijem.
Ne znam kako da ti objasnim.
Imaju, ali kao da je nemaju, a?
Imaš ljudi koji su možda uzeli, ne znam ako je bila besplatna na Epic Store ili tako nešto, ali...
Ma gledam ono character customization, znaš, svašta, buildovi, gledam to, znaš, ludilo. Samo bi ti tu Ilija morao da me malo provedeš. Kad budemo krenuli. Zdravlje Bože. Šta si igra kod tebe, čovječe?
Igram trenutno... Pomozi mi reći si Path of Exile.
Jesi uzao onog peta?
Drop.
Drop što daju, aha.
Drop, jes.
I kako, on ti se samo stvori pri pokretanju igre u inventaru ili kako?
Pa trčka za tobom. Ne skuplja ništa, samo ono...
Vidiš ti koje su ovo kurvice u Remnantu, gledam baš, znači imaju startne 4 klase, znaš. Ali s onom Ultimate dobiješ i 5 ono Gunsling, već zove klase.
Ali slušaj me, Gunslinger ti u čaši granje.
Znam, oni kažu, ali kažu uz Ultimate...
Nema potrebe za tim. Imaš dovoljno startnih klasa dok dođeš da maksuješ sve klase, jer znaš kako funkcioniše sistem u igri? Ti kad maksuješ jednu klasu, ti možda se prebaciš na drugu.
To kažu, da, možeš...
Dobiješ ultimate skill od te klase i kad ga maksuješ klasu na 20. level, naučiš taj skill za stalno koji ta klasa ima. Naprimjer, Medic ima healing skill, ja mislim. To ti je pasiv koji ti poboljšava sve kao healing, magije, napitke i to. Ali to ima samo Medic. Ali ako maksuješ Medika na 20. level, njegov skill mogu da koriste sve ostale klase.
To je super, čovjek. Ti možeš znači da kombinuješ ovdje ludilo, brate.
Jeste, s tim što samo primarna aktivna klasa ti ostaje aktivna.
Da, base class.
Da.
Super bre, super. Interesantno je.
Umri duše.
Tip kaže, tip number one, šta ćemo kaži? 9 tips and tricks. 9 tips and tricks. Detect enemies with infinity stamina. Nemam pojma.
Infinity?
Stamina.
Mora da
Kad si
bagne.
blizu tebe neprijatelji, ne gubiš staminu kad trčiš, vidiš. Evo gledam ovdje neke tips and tricks.
Kako kad su blizu tebe?
Sad ću da ti baš kažem, evo ovo gledam.
Dok god nema neprijatelja na ekranu imaš ograničeno stamina. Ako je to taj tip.
Pa priča isto za armor, što ti je veći armor, jebeno ti je za dodge, znaš ono, tips and tricks, brate, za nubare kao što sam ja. Light, medium, heavy i ultra dodge. Idi bre u kurac.
Imaš i Mr. Dodge, kao Bloodborne. Imaš da pokupiš određeni medaljon i određeni prsten, to ti je u onom šumskom svetu. I umjesto armora koji zavisi od težine, to jest dodža koji zavisi od težine armora, imaš taj Mr. Dodge da se pretvoriš kao vampir, ono, u maglu i kao bukvalno blinkuješ se u stranu.
Vidio sam to, brate, na onom terenu kad smo pucali iz oružja da probamo, znaš, koje je oružje. Vidio sam, to si mi pokazivao. S onim, ja mislim baš da si imao onog viteza, brate, u oklopu kad si dođeo.
Da.
Čini mi se da si s njim.
Jest.
Ako se ne varam.
Mislim da je to.
I kolika je Ilija igra? Ogromna. Ima da igramo da se useremo, a?
Otprilike.
Super.
Za mene dovoljno velika, za tebe...
Odlično.
Vidjet ćemo koliko budeš igrao, to tako ide.
Kažem ti, hoću, brate, da uzem te naslove, da imam res. Prvo, sviđa mi se naslov, drugo, znaš, bez veze da igram baš sam. Znaš, nije mi...
Tako igram.
Znam da neću da ga igram sam. Igraću ja njega sam, ono, sigurno, dok... Znaš, jebi ga, nova igra, probaš, vidiš kako je, šta ti ćeš da mi kažeš neke stvari, ali ja ću da ono... Ali znaš, ono, kad znaš da imaš čoveka s kim možeš da pikaš, drugačije. A ja sad uzimam ovaj Remnant, ma ono, kao, niko neće da igra, onda koji će mi kurac, realno.
Da.
Vidiš ti to dobra fora, mod za oružje kad kupiš možeš da ga ekipuješ skoro na bilo kom oružju.
Ako nema zaključan slot.
Naravno, naravno.
Boss oružje ima zaključan slot, zašto imaš boss skill na njemu. Naprimjer.
Koliko je ona na kom većem levelu od Dark Tide-a ova igra, brate, nevjerovatno.
Ajde da kažem da si upravo.
Pa jesam.
Znam da jesu, tako reći.
Jessica White. Welcome to my channel.
Igre i ona je neuporediv.
Ti danas radiš drugu?
Meni je ovo, brate, toliko, da.
Si...
Drugu sam danas.
Da.
Još danas pa sam 2 treće. Mada mi možemo da igramo, zdravlje Bože, možemo da pikamo ako si ti slobodan dan.
Ako ti si igra Dark Tide-a. Trenutno nema interesantnih u Helldiverima tih Mage Ordera. Ako ima nešto, kao kad su onda ubacili Predator Bubi, sjećaš se?
Sjećam se.
Ili kad su ubacili one kao Incinerary, kao korps kod botova, imaš Hulka koji ispaljuje zapaljivu mortar amuniciju, imaš obične botove koji te gađu zapaljivom mecima. Znaš, to ti je nešto da kažemo, jeste varijacija na postojeći, ali ono teže, razumeš, ili drugačije moraš da pristupiš problemu. A ne ovo isto, razumeš, joj. Još. Eto, samo da uzmem checkpoint u sljedećoj oblasti, pa možemo da igramo ako hoćeš. Ako si igra, na primjer, Dark Tide.
Može. Naravno. Evo, evo ispušim strugu i da isrčem još pola ove kafe. I Emilija Frankovu kafu kao gospodin. Dobro, brate, za promjenu majke mi je davno, je nisam pio juče, kao i leglo mi dobro.
To mislim da si mi rekao bio juče.
Aha. Stvarno, baš za promjenu mi leže na želudac. Koja je to boss borbe, krv ti jebemo u pičku, lele.
Pa neki su teže, neki su lakše. Ajmo da kažemo tako.
Ali, znaš šta je meni ovdje fascinantno? Vrste neprijatelja, to je toliko, brate...
Šaronoliko.
Dizajnivo...
Svaka planeta ili svaki taj biom kroz koji se krećeš ima drugačije neprijatelje. Prodati, samo prodati.
Da, pričaju sad trenutno kako da otključaš neke archetypove, odeš kod medika, ne znaš šta treba da kupiš, pa onda treba da kupiš Rusty Medal from Bardwood.
Imaš jednu za koju treba ili da pređeš čitavu igru ili da igraš sa čovjekom koji je prešao čitavu igru da bi je prešao. To ti je Arhon. Arhon ti kao mage ili kao čak arc mage, toliko jako.
Ludilo. Koliko si rekao da ima archetypa da otključaš 12?
Archetypa ima... Pa tako, oko 12, da. Ne znam sam rekao malo, ne znam sam rekao malo.
Uzmeš medika i napraviš archetype s njim, na primjer, jebi mu mater, ne znam šta s njim dobro bi moglo da ide. Ne, to je veoma interesantno, to mi se sviđa, čoveče. To mi se sviđa do duše i u Dark Tide neke stvari, znači ono, bukvalno loadout 1 sa skill 3-em, istim likom i drugi loadout je potpuno drugačiji.
Da, dodali su više loadouta, to je ono što je...
Pa to je to. To mi se sviđa. Plus kombinacije ovih drugih klasa, brate, pa varijacije su ogromne, realno.
Joj, koje smeće! Šajt. Baba. Drži, baba. Aha. Ok, sure. Vjera što rekao na sve. Ne sve mi.
Kako je ovo informacija, sad gledam trade poene, ma idi bre u kurac. Archetype, character, traits, inventory, map i dobro. I ovaj nesrećnik od onog kamena isto. Pa da, to je taj startni grad, kako se već zove. Evo, kurvica, malo ne volim. Ovo mi bukvalno pokazuje što bi mi ti pokazuje igre. Idi tu, pričaj s njim, to uradi da bi to, kupi to i, viš, i dobiješ. A da. Medic pin kupiš kod nje, odeš kod Volesa, tralala i dobiješ eto taj sljedeći archetype.
Remnant 2 is a damn fun game, but it can be a little overwhelming if you've never played a Souls-like game before. Hi, I'm Fallout, a guy who spends way too much time. Need to first get their respective engram from Dr. Nora. The Hunter engram.
Na primjer, neke stvari moraš da kupiš od ovih NPC trgovca da bi otišao klase. A kad kupiš određeni broj oružja, ili više čini mi se možeš i da dobiš free od ovoga Brabusa. Brabus ti je neki bandit, u suštini penzionisani bandit koji ti radi na strelištu, on ti prodaje oružje. Od njega uzmeš medalju, on ti otključa lovac klasu.
Ili je naravno otključao sve.
Pa, zato što je teško da otključaš sve i... If you want, just know that no matter how you multi-class, you'll only have one prime perk active. Da, imaš svaka klasa ima svoj skill. Od tih koliko 10-12 klasa ima glavni skill, a ostalo su ti kao sekundarni bonusi. Šta je bili sekundarni bonusi? Pa sekundarni bonus ti je na primjer... inženjer ima da postavlja turete. I ako uzmeš sekundarnu klasu inženjer možeš da mećeš turete. Možeš da mećeš turete kao pomoć, a recimo također možda budeš i summoner, to ti je kao da prizivaš zveri iz prirode. Imaš 3 vrste tih kao summona, to ti u suštini sa te šumske planete kao te jiše. Imaš, ne znam, neke male kuglice koje se kotrljaju, neke slab mob, ali ono, default je ga. Onda imaš neke range što te gađu, dosta su solidni zato što lete i... sad ono što su igrači tražili je da ti leteći mobovi malo više lete, da ti ne lete otprilike u visini očiju, jer dosta puta se možda desi da pucaš u njih, umjesto da pucaš u neprijatelje. A dobro, to se dešava. Ili igraš oko toga, ili ono, znaš, staviš takvu situaciju da ne pucaš. I zadnji summon ti je golem, ako se dobro sjeća, na 20. level. I golem je ono melee jedinica, ima dosta healtha i može da gađi sa sekirom, to mu je specijalni napad.
Koliko imaš sati ti u Remnantu, čoveče?
Pa ne znam. Sad si već imam solidno. Možda ne koliko bih hteo, ali 300 sati, 315 sati.
Oho, super.
Pa to nije nešto. U Dark Soulsu 3 sam imao 800 sati.
Nije nešto, evo gledam ja na Sonyu, brate, imam 105 u Dark Tide-u, krv ti jebem, šta ga imam 10 dana, evo. Da, razumem te, ti šta pričaš, takva igra, brate, barem 3 puta toliko minimum.
Ako hoćeš da vidiš šta treba da uradiš za klasu Summoner, ja bi ti preporučio da googlaš.
Da, pa moram kad budem ono...
Ne, pogledaj sad ako te ne mrzi, pogledaj. Da vidiš koliko je dugačak zadatak za to. Prvo treba da nađeš Mesečev oltar u šumi. I kad nađeš Mesečev oltar, onda treba da restartuješ mapu, da ulaziš i izlaziš iz jedne šumske mape. Moment, dok na nebu ne bude kao crveni mesec.
Ozbiljno, ja.
Da, mesec se ne vidi dok ne prođeš malo kroz šumu i pogledaš na delove šume koje vide si zapravo nebo. Imaš vidjeti po šumi kako lete visoko onako iznad glave ti. Vidjet ćeš male orbove.
Svašta jebate, koje su to detalji sitnice.
Imaju jedan health, bukvalno bilo koje oružje, onaj default pištolj može da ih upuca. Pukneš u njega, on ti kao automatski se doda u inventar kao jedan blood orb. Treba ti 20 tih blood orbova, čini mi se, za klasu da kupiš, summonera. I treba ti još jedno 60 da kupiš armor set. Za svaka klasa ima svoj armor.
To si mi rekao, da.
Ima i Summoner klasa. Izgleda kao neki šumski demon. Obrastao korenjem. A nije demon, ono. Kao neki mali Trent, ono, drveni čovjek. Tako izgleda. Obrastao korenjem.
Kao Milan u kanalu.
Naprimjer, armori su u ovome Remnantu Kecu davali pasivne bonuse, ovdje ne daju.
I to sam malo previdio isto.
Ali daju, to je zato da bi ljudi mogli da miksiraju delove armora. Ali zato ti daju armor kao taj damage resistance. Recimo na, ne znam, na munju, na vatru, na otrov. Taj rad. Na kraj sela čađava mehana, kranje viri ova nečešljana.
Koliko je on velik, ili ja? Remnant dvojka.
Napisio?
Da.
Zadnja verzija igre bila je installed files 86 GB.
Oho, mašalo.
Pa veliki su nivoi i ima dosta tih hramova, tamnica. Svaki put kad igraš iz početka nivo ili mini kampanju, imaš da igraš kampanju i mini kampanju. Mini kampanja je samo taj jedan svet, uradiš reroll ili ti kao u fazonu, mini kampanja ti se sadrži od recimo 5 do 10 mapa spojenih. Kampanja čitava ti je sva 3 sveta, razumeš, ono, jebi ga, ne znaš šta ćeš dobiti, koje zadatke. I postoje 3-4 određene varijante kako može kampanja da se roluje. A mini kampanja ima mnogo više varijacija i u toj, ne zove se mini kampanja, oni to zovu adventure mod.
Aha.
I u tom adventure modu možda nađeš zadatke i stvari koje ne možeš ovako normalno da nađeš. I u suštini to produžava i vreme igranja i omogućava ti da vidiš sve moguće varijacije nivoa koje, slično kao kad igraš Diablo 2, na primjer. Ne znam da li bi bilo približno tome, ili Diablo Kecu. Diablo Kecu kad kreneš igru, nikad ne znaš da šta ćeš naći, znaš samo da je Butcher na drugom nivou, sve ostalo opcijeno.
Jeste, tačno.
Bio je free DLC za Vampire Survivors, ako hoćeš možeš da ga uzmeš na Steamu za free, ako se dobro sjećam. Samo odeš u store i klikneš na add. Free je za sve igrače. To ti je, kako se zove, Emerald diorama. Ako imaš Vampire Survivors na ovome, pomozi mi reći, urađen je kao neki japanski RPG u tom fazonu. Imaš novi DLC da klimaš. To je zato što su dobili BAFTA nagradu, kao znaš.
Za Vampire Survivors?
Emerald diorama. Daje 12 karaktera, 19 oružja, novu mapu i... Zapravo 2 mape su, jednu mapu plus još jednu. Znaš.
Onda jaja, uzeo sam, hvala bre.
Ništa. Ali piše ti tamo, imaš hintove, na primjer, nije ti odmah otključano. Dosta stvari u Vampire Survivorsu nije odmah na tacni, nego moraš da uradiš nešto da bi se otključalo, znaš. Imaš ga dodato, ali ako te zanima kako da aktiviraš, moraš da nađeš kako se dolazi do toga. Kao Elden Ring. Elden Ring kupiš DLC za $40 i kažu ti da moraš da pređeš Mog, kako se zove, Mog kralj, on ti je tajni opcijni boss, ali moraš da ga pobediš da bi došao do DLC-a koji si plati $40. Znači, pretpostavlja se da si sposoban da igraš igru, znaš. nema ga na tacni. Znači, to ti je DLC za ona, razumeš, sa DLC, ono, bossovima, kontentom, ono što si plati.
Majku im njenu.
Neki ljudi to ne vole, ja smatram da je to cool. Što podrazumeva se da znaš šta igraš. Isto kao Havok. Havok ti traži da si 30. level u Dark Tide, jel tako? I da si prešao onu mapu, kako se zove, Maelstrom mapu. Znači traži nešto kao preduslov da možeš odmah da igraš. Jeste, to je content, ali za ljudi koji već znaju da igraju i koji su već ušli malo duže u igru. Dok u Mortis Trials možda igraš i mali level, ako si, ja mislim.
Da, možeš.
Mogu da te...
Do 11-ice ne otvarati se.
A dobro, i to je malo, samo da ti kažem. To se brzo dođe do toga. To je relativno mali level, zato što u Mortis Trialu dobijaš experience, vjerojatno si vidio. Dobijaš experience i kada ovako... Igraš, teo sam reći, ali...
Middle Hospice CZG. Welcome to my channel. S.W.Frost on stream.com remove the space wasnt.
Yes. Recon Lasgan.
Very well.
Ovdje penica ima, krv ti jebem. Ma edi, bre.
How may I serve? My advice, do not disappoint in your duty.
Those who steal from the Omnissiah should expect...
Šta ćemo?
Papiri mi treba, da.
Papers.
Yes. Samo da vidim. Evo ovo. Level 1 bukvalno.
Može, šta ima veze? Bitno da se završava ovo.
Taj mač je jako dobar.
Sad njega polako.
Kad ga napuniš sa munjom možeš da dekneš iz udarca one jače neprijatelje. Ne najjače, ali ove mutante, berzekere i ostalo govno. Ovo je onaj mob iz Clandestine Gloriana.
Felicitations and my humblest greetings. I wasn't sure you found...
Yes. Do you suppose we might proceed?
Is that interrogator Rannick? Grendel always said that you were inclined towards the festive.
I'm sure these operatives find all this talk of Grendel rather dull.
The good Inquisitor said you'd say that. Never mind, to business.
Chibu!
Give me cover!
Show me what you got! Jab shot, the flow reflex proper lies across the inner void. We'll need to return power to the lateral shuttle. The less area of you can fly.
Papiri ovdje.
We have done better to keep to the Valkyrie, don't you think?
But there are those ticklish
Idemo dalje.
auto defenses to consider. It's better this way.
Chibu.
Znam da nema gore neki...
Ustvari.
It's not much to look at, is it? But this place could tip the balance of the war.
Oj! Nakluzam sam se na korot banana.
Trčkam. Spasili ste botovi, dobre.
Ovdje ima onaj...
Šta se bro ili ovoliko ovdje čuje?
Mislim da je dole ispod, šta ću reći?
Mogući da je ovdje ispred, mamo mu je. A ispred je. Evo ga tamo.
Take them out!
Start Gunnar! Start Gunnar!
Koji Gunnar?
Once the power transfer is underway,
Prekidaš nam treba. Opet. Stani tam gdje sam ja bio dole. Treba da gledamo na ove transformatori, kad neki zataji da povučemo prekidaš odmah. Samo ih prati kako se pale.
I on je negdje došao.
Šta? Mora sutra ovo raditi. Pratimo ove generatore. To je to. Ja na koju stranu se ide? Da, tuda. Let's use a bolt pistol. Treba ti 1 metar bukvalno, dobiješ 1 metar.
For a little more urgency.
Request acknowledged. Authorized.
What a remarkable specimen you are. Though of what?
It looks positively frosty down there. You're making me cold.
It's bracing, so long as we keep moving.
And if you don't?
Tell me, does the phrase frozen solid mean anything to you?
Strike team, stand ready. The heretics are shortly waiting.
I shall watch your deeds with great interest. From a distance, you understand.
Sigma minority retreat! Coming! Fire out! Rally formation! Right fucking now! They're everywhere! Ammo crate! Ammo crate! ahead! Double double! Wait for a clean shot! Bet you can't hate that shot again! We're gonna throw the heretics out of this place! You'll see!
For the coma! For the guard!
Barrel's gonna explode!
Bravo.
Meni je stvarno lobato, ne znam za tebe. Meni se
I
stvarno.
could be anywhere else. Reckon our people
Meni se stvarno.
Terrorism will be like everywhere else. Ex-war.
A kad se
Give
tebi
them
nije
bragging
smrtno?
right out to see the golden throne.
Juče
Just
ti je bilo
once.
potamo. Pa to je fenomenalno, čovječe. To je fenomenalno.
Outpaced you again, did I? Well, that's experience for you.
Evo. Igramo se malo.
Stop, shotgunner!
Down it is!
Right! All right! This machine isn't dead, but sleeping. You'll see soon enough.
Try to fly aim!
Rush out! That barrel's gonna explode! Tracks is 7-7 down!
Ona nije mogla da legne nego sad.
Papirići, ali slasla.
This is gonna be a messy one! Work together! Roll! This thing's even tougher than a regular old ring! No surrender! Just a little more! And that's how you do it in the guard! Dragging things dead! At last! Get patched up!
Znao sam da će se prevariti. Gdje je li ovdje papirč?
Mislim da je možda gore, sve ću ti reći. Mislim da je gore na onome zupčaniku. Gledam da nije ovdje u ćošku negde. Gore, gore. Iza glave direktno. Kao da je tu, ali mora da je gore. Uvijek iza glave. Pravo pa desno.
Ma dobro to, nego gledam i ovdje. A idem gore, okej. Znam ja gore da idemo, ali da nije negdje ovdje, mamu. Znaš bre.
Pravo tu skroz, na dnu cevi.
Pravo.
Da, tu. Skroz na kraj desno. Vidiš?
Vidim. Jebote, gdje su je stavili? Jebo.
To je Ketman slučajno našao bio.
Da. Igram jedne te iste igre, razumiješ? Eto šta da. Jedne te iste igre svaki dan vodeći.
Demons are dangerous no matter where you are.
I did hear that thing about Absolute Reach. That's just a story.
To te tišti, ja.
Da.
Knjiga je negdje ovdje, ali mislim da... Juče iz daljine, nisam tada prolazim da ne bi došao u situaciju da uopšte moram da s njim komuniciram. Stric me gore, stric me zvao.
A bot neće ga.
Neće.
Nesrećni kučki zem.
My reading shows that the error is somewhere above you. Kindly investigate.
Wow. Bacio je bombu kroz otvorena vrata.
Da, vidio si. Bravo.
Dobre. Evo. To je to.
I shouldn't be surprised. Nothing ever works as it should on a tumor.
Then again, there is much to be fatalistic about.
And more with every passing hour.
Toliko o tome, a? Nesrećno kuće.
Won't be a problem now. Industry. Time we were moving on to the Sacrarium Mechanicus.
I did disable the auto defenses, by the way. I'm sure you missed it with all that was going on.
This way.
Sad si bio Ilija jedno 10 metra od lifta i u jednoj sekciji si bio u liftu i brzi. Nevjerojatno.
Da.
Neke
Fantazija.
vampirske tehnike,
Telepromptovanje.
A ja nisam pono Ilija teleprompter je.
Daj tu torbu.
Uzeš se bam.
Courage is too expensive a commodity for you, I take it.
To je glupo, brate, što i botovi ne uzimaju, brate, ove skripte i ništa živo, znači ništa živo ne uzimaju. Samo mi troše jebeni metri, jebeni.
Ne koristi se. Totalni.
Borisu, ali radiš danas, Borisu? Briga tebe, možeš kako hoćeš. Šta je sad ovog klepsa u na plato, a? Mame ti ga nabijem nesrećno.
Pobježi.
Pobeže, eno ga, mame mu ga nabijem. Pa ću mu jednim helija. I pobeži tamo.
Kroz vrata pobježi. Debilko. Stiže na rundu 2.
Vidim ga. Prvo će ovaj nećrećnim da ispusti dušu. A posle za tim i njih. Ovo ne ti Čivu.
Ti treba i ti repair zraci. Evo izvola. Teško je to raditi ako neko stalno ti uzima to. Ja sam imam par tih challenge-a da napravim, ali ne mogu da ih završim zato što stalno imaš ljudi koji grabi to prvi da izradi. Aj za nas.
Oko nemo da lažeš, bot. A bot samo. Vještačka inteligencija. Igraš s nama i protiv nas. Ben ti naš kako vreme došlo, čoveče. Dark Tide.
Rally formation! Right fucking now! Where am I?
Ne razumijem što neće da mi gore u arcade, u arcade i ništa. Gore su power spell.
Nis, idi okolo. Idi okolo, imaš ove...
Da ti jebem krvavo, bro.
Trapper, a?
ti već našao, jedno verovatno.
Našao sam oba.
Jedno veće pravim čovječe... Potom potiči i kjetan je zdovoljno. A nisam. Radeo sam, batu. Pa to posle obično igram kad... Gledam. Bori se kako igra kampno. Ti bre. Control! Daj. Rade, brate, će da ubaci crossplay, pa ću da vam se pridružim, da vam se userem u igru. I onda stanem na stranu onih Kineza.
To ti misliš da neće?
Hoće, daće Bog. I samo specijalno uključujem onaj aim assist i da vidiš šta je.
Pa već mogu da igraš, šta je to problem?
Pa da. Samo neću još da vam se userim u život, razmišljam kad je
Kad je najslađe.
Ne seri bre Borise, nemoj da sereš, molim te. Nemoj da mi dižeš pritisak sad od 9 časova i 8 minuta iz ranog jutra.
Moraš da razumeš ljude koji zalegnu i odmore se, razumeš, uz kontroler, na primjer moj kum.